as a tide of ghosts erupts from the town of Chuansong, with hundreds of thousands of spirits appearing in a single instant. They pour out from a massive pentagonal light formation in the sky, continuing until a truly colossal ghost finally emerges. This final entity rises from the town with a hideous, excited expression, howling into the midst of the raging storm. He screams that Fan Yu is doomed, his voice echoing across the Jiangbei sky and striking the members of the Fan Yu organization. The pressure is overwhelming, leaving everyone frozen in place with a flicker of pure terror in their eyes as a king descends from the heavens. Angry cries fill the air, and while many members have seen ghosts before, this feels entirely different to them. Imagine the scene, hundreds of thousands of ghosts hovering just a few hundred meters directly above your head. The sight of that dark, swarming mass brings a crushing weight unlike any other, and for some, it is simply too much to bear. Their legs give way, and they collapse to the ground, certain that the Yuzhu rainy season defense line is about to fail. They never expected the enemy to drop from the sky, but suddenly, the massive ghost roaring in the air notices something strange. He realizes his body isn't actually falling, and he looks around in confusion, wondering why he is stuck in midair. He finds he cannot move at all, and beside him, one of his ghost kings begins to tremble as he looks down. The ghost king gazes at the 14-kilometer-long defense line below, his voice shaking with realization. He stammers that those are level 5 walls, specifically upgraded for anti-air combat to create a total no-fly zone. The great ghost, who had been so excited to lead the raid just moments ago, freezes as his face turns deathly pale. He feels as though he is submerged in a thick, viscous swamp, unable to budge no matter how much strength he exerts. He realizes they are finished, completely and utterly finished, and that using a sky formation instead of a land formation was a fatal mistake. Their intelligence was only a few days old, yet in that tiny window of time, everything had changed. He cannot fathom how Fan Yu managed to build such a massive perimeter of level 5 walls so quickly. Meanwhile, standing atop the rainy season defense wall, Chenfan watches the scene, his mouth slowly hanging open in disbelief. Chenfan looks up at the hundreds of thousands of ghosts bound in midair by the no-fly zone, standing frozen in utter disbelief. It takes him a long time to recover. He had considered every possible attack method, but never that the enemy would drop from the sky. His walls were designed to prevent anything from flying over them, so this specific type of aerial invasion had never crossed his mind. He truly didn't know a formation existed that could teleport ghosts directly into the air, and in such staggering numbers, no less. After a long silence, Chenfan finally snaps out of it and murmurs to himself as he scans the dense, swarming mass of spirits. Although most are low-level ghosts, they still form an incredibly terrifying spectral tide when gathered in such a massive swarm. If they had launched a direct assault on the rainy season defense line, the outcome would be uncertain, especially regarding that colossal entity. He has no idea how powerful that giant ghost is, but as it turns out, he doesn't actually need to know. Across the 14-kilometer defense line, 740 max-level Shikigami cannons begin to hum with power. Alongside them, 148 anti-air batteries light up, transforming the once gray walls into a glowing fortress. Nearly 1,000 turrets suddenly ignite, looking like a sudden burst of stars scattered across the thick, gray fog of the battlefield. These glowing turrets begin to rotate slowly, shifting their muzzles away from the ground and tilting them upward toward the sky. They lock onto the helpless ghosts trapped above Fan Yu at a steep angle, and in that moment, the ghosts realize they are finished. The massive ghost leader, still struggling as if stuck in a swamp, feels a flicker of pure terror rising from deep within. He begins to scream hysterically, begging Chenfan to spare him and offering to act as a double agent for the humans. He promises to help fight the undersea ghost nests when they land in 3 years, pleading for Chenfan to name any price for his life. Standing atop the wall, Chenfan listens to the desperate pleas echoing across Jiangbei and suddenly breaks into a cold laugh. A ghost that knows how to beg for its life is certainly interesting, but he has no intention of keeping a spirit as a pet. The hundreds of Shikigami cannons and anti-air batteries finish charging their energy, and for a heartbeat, the world goes still. Countless beams of light pierce the night sky. The rainy season has arrived, but this time, it will be a rain of blood. The fire spreads across Jiangbei, bathing Fan Yu in a baptism of blood as shells erupt from the Shikigami cannons like arrows from a bow. They streak toward the spectral nest suspended in the air, glowing with a crimson energy that strikes fear into the very soul of anyone watching. A silent explosion ripples through the sky, soundless, yet somehow deafening, as the crimson shells burst apart with violent force. Releasing their stored power all at once, the shells instantly pulverize every ghost in the immediate vicinity into nothingness. A rain of crimson blood begins to fall, but the overflowing energy acts like vines of light, spreading with incredible speed to the surrounding spirits. In a matter of seconds, an entire section of the ghost nest is wiped clean, leaving nothing but empty air behind. This is the heavenly blessing effect of the Shikigami cannons, where excess damage cascades outward, and that was just a single shot. Now, imagine 740 max-level cannons firing in unison, joined by 148 anti-air batteries. Emerald flares burst in the sky like fireworks, adding a strange, vibrant color to a scene otherwise dominated by blood and gray fog. The rainy season has truly arrived, and as the Great Ghost's army is torn apart, the members of Fanyu stand frozen in shock. They stare upward, unable to look away from the spectacle unfolding above them, their minds struggling to process what they are seeing. It is the greatest sight of their lives. Hundreds of thousands of ghosts, like lambs to the slaughter, suspended helplessly in the air. The spirits are forced to endure the relentless bombardment, their numbers dwindling at a staggering rate. To be honest, it isn't much of a fight anymore. The massive leader, Wan Yin, has managed to survive the initial blast thanks to his thick hide, but he is now heavily wounded and near death. He roars in a fit of futile rage, cursing the humans and their overwhelming power, realizing his grand invasion has turned into a farce. He tells himself that if he had stayed back to command, or if he hadn't led the charge personally, but there are no ifs left for him. Any one of those scenarios might have given him a chance to rise again, but he has run out of luck. And then, the end arrives. Dozens of crimson shells lock onto him, flying straight for his massive form, and the Great Ghost finally stops struggling. He watches the incoming projectiles and looks down at Chen Fan standing on the wall, his voice dripping with pure, concentrated malice. He begins to laugh like a madman, screaming that Chen Fan will die too when the true ghost tide arrives, promising to wait for him in the afterlife. His voice cuts off abruptly as dozens of crimson shells converge, completely enveloping his massive form in a final, violent embrace. The Great Ghost, who once commanded for powerful ghost kings, is reduced to a rain of blood in a single, thunderous instant. His remains mingle with the mist as the gray, torrential rain continues to fall, blanketing the entirety of Jiangbei in a somber veil. The downpour quickly washes the blood from the earth, signaling the end of the war that Chen Fan had been anticipating since the year began. He had spent an entire year preparing for this very moment, building his defenses specifically to withstand an invasion of this magnitude. But as we know, fate is unpredictable. Even he didn't expect the Great Ghost to lead an army down from the very heavens. Standing atop the wall, Chen Fan watches the mesmerizing rain of blood, a scene that is, in its own terrifying way, quite beautiful. A lion uses its full strength even when hunting a rabbit, Chen Fan whispers, repeating the dying words of the Great Ghost. He doesn't reach for an umbrella, choosing instead to stand in the storm and laugh as the rain beats against his skin. He wonders if the ghost ever learned the human saying about not using a poleaxe to kill a chicken, or perhaps that experience comes with age. After mocking the ghost's poor choice of idioms, Chen Fan turns his attention inward to the interface of the Eternal Night Lord. Before the rainy season began, he had acquired a blue-grade building known as the Reincarnation Tower, and its effect is quite simple. Any enemy slain by a structure within his territory is permanently erased, leaving absolutely no possibility of resurrection. The Great Ghost had claimed they would meet again, leading Chen Fan to believe the creature might have had a hidden trick up its sleeve. However, the Reincarnation Tower's panel shows that all accidental factors have been neutralized, meaning the ghost was simply bluffing. "We will meet again," Chen Fan repeats with a light chuckle, amused by the ghost's empty parting threat. He finds himself wondering what final words he would choose in such a moment. To be honest, that ghost line wasn't nearly intimidating enough. Fanyu becomes a hive of activity once more as the members, guided by their captains, begin the grim task of clearing the battlefield. As they work through the pouring rain, a faint, rhythmic thudding sound suddenly echoes from the base of the Great Wall. Chen Fan leans over the edge to investigate and discovers a lone throat ghost shivering at the very foot of the fortifications. The creature is laboring away, striking the wall with all its might, yet the stone doesn't lose so much as a speck of dust. Chen Fan watches this scene in silence, remembering how he witnessed something similar a year ago at the old camp, though he was much more pathetic back then. Looking at this familiar sight now, he suddenly feels a strange sense of nostalgia for that first rainy season as time begins to slip away. More and more ghosts emerge from the liquid depths into the gray mist, eventually rushing toward the base of the wall along the entire Jiangbei line. They begin to surround the area, and Chen Fan, looking down from his high vantage point, notes that there are quite a few old friends among them. The Divine Vision cannons remain silent for now. After all, those shells aren't cheap, and using them on these scattered ghosts would be a waste. Firing now would certainly be a losing investment, but suddenly, Chen Fan's brow twitches as he spots something emerging from the gray fog. Dozens of ghosts carrying white lanterns appear, the morning ghosts. He remembers them well. They are incredibly dangerous, and nearly cost him his life. If he hadn't managed to kill their leader back then, causing the rest to perish with him, he wouldn't be standing here today. It was one of the greatest crises he ever faced. A moment later, the runes on the Divine Vision cannon nearest to the ghosts begin to glow. The weapon charges ring by ring until a shell of crimson energy pierces through the torrential rain, heading straight for the center of the pack. A thunderous boom echoes as the ground trembles, and a massive surge of crimson energy begins to arc outward like a nest of snakes. The morning ghosts are vaporized instantly, and the overflowing damage ripples outward, tearing through the other creatures gathered at the wall. A massive clearing is carved out in an instant, leaving Chunfan with a slightly puzzled expression as he surveys the carnage below. The scene is quite different from what he expected. He thought the cannon's splash damage would clear out the ghosts after they split apart. As it turns out, the morning ghosts didn't even get the chance to split. They were simply reduced to fine powder. He checks the detailed information for the reincarnation tower on his interface and, sure enough, notices a new change in the data. The tower can actually suppress the splitting ability, treating it as a form of resurrection. To be honest, that is a very convenient feature. Any creature killed by the territory's defensive structures will have its soul completely extinguished, leaving no hope of returning to life. Standing in the heavy rain, Chunfan takes a long, deep breath and finally smiles before heading down the wall toward Wuming Mountain. At that very moment, deep within his soul, the Eternal Night Spirit Lord interface begins to flash with a persistent yellow light. Sensing the shift, Chunfan stops in his tracks and turns his gaze toward the source, the stargazing platform. This unique wonder had been silent for so long that it was almost forgotten, a relic of a quieter time. But tonight, it begins to issue one warning after another, utilizing its ability to observe the ghost nests in the surrounding regions. Sure enough, as the incense of the month's end burns low, the wind arrives, bringing with it a tide of fleshworm ghosts. They emerge from the eternal night, passing through the gray mist and crashing uncontrollably against the city walls with a sickening sound. The air is filled with the constant popping of their bodies as thick, green, highly corrosive liquid explodes everywhere. The acid begins to eat at the stone, but the heavy rain dilutes it so quickly that it fails to leave even a single mark. The city's altars aren't even triggered. The level 5 wall stands along the Jiangbei line like an insurmountable heavenly barrier. Chunfan stands atop the wall, quietly watching as the ghost stones fall to the ground amidst the self-destructing creatures. He observes the scattered green slime from above, while on the other side of the world, work in the new continent continues unabated. The atmosphere there is still one of feverish labor, with Keiho sitting on the wall of the number 1 stronghold. He is busy counting the number of ghost stones mined today, focused entirely on the day's haul. Suddenly, he notices a long, seemingly endless trail of eerie green light glowing in the darkness, coming from a specific direction. It is coming from the Sea of Thunder. Chiweho's expression shifts as he quickly pulls a transmission talisman from his robes. He reports the situation in detail, and after a moment of hesitation, he adds a personal note for his young master. He explains that the Sea of Thunder is emitting a strange green glow. It doesn't look like a seal breaking, but it is certainly unsettling. There hasn't been any great commotion yet, but the timing is suspicious, coinciding perfectly with the arrival of the Jiangbei rainy season. He suspects there might be a connection between the two. Meanwhile, deep within the new continent, the man known as Wang Matsi stands alone at the edge of the floating territory, staring intently into the distance. In the distance, he spots a massive crater on the ground, a hole that clearly wasn't formed by nature. It looks as though it was blasted into existence, and he plans to investigate it at daybreak. That night, while many members of the Fanyu faction in the new continent have already drifted off to sleep back at the main base, many others find themselves tossing and turning, unable to rest now that the stone clearing is finally finished. We return to the wall of cave number 1 on Fanyu's nameless mountain, where Chunfan listens to Wang Kuei's report. As he hears the tally of loot from the fleshworm ghosts, he examines a specific ghost stone in his hand. This single stone is worth 10,000 ordinary ones, the first time he has ever seen one of such high quality. It was harvested from the body of the great ghost. After admiring it for a moment, he tucks it into his robes. He decides not to put this one in the treasury. He'll keep it as a personal collectible, as he quite likes it. Wang Kuei continues his report, noting that several rare treasures were also dropped and have already been stored for inspection. 2 treasures in particular, formed from the great ghost's essence, shine the brightest as Wang Kuei presents them. Chunfan's eyebrows lift in surprise. These 2 items alone are worth hundreds of white-grade treasures. Both are yellow-grade. The first is an old friend, a familiar stone known as the Heavenly Path Stone. This yellow-grade treasure possesses a remarkable effect when applied to any structure within the camp. It grants the building a heavenly blessing, which then extends to every other building of the same type. It can only be used on max-level structures, which, to be honest, is a fair trade for such power. Chunfan smiles and pockets the stone, already wondering which of his max-level buildings deserves the upgrade. The second item is a special type of treasure that looks like a piece of dark, soft marshmallow or a cloud. This yellow-grade treasure is called the Cloud Knot, and its effect is as unique as its appearance. Once placed in the camp and fueled by ghost stones, it creates localized rainfall accompanied by thunder and lightning. Chunfan's brow furrows slightly as he ponders the possibilities. It's a rare treasure capable of controlling the weather, and though its rank isn't high, the mere ability to manipulate the elements is extraordinary. Even if it only produces small-scale rainfall, it could prove incredibly useful. We see a woman sitting on the city wall, looking up at the nameless mountain cliffs where the eternal night has already shrouded the sky pillar. Amidst the constant roll of thunder, she can clearly see the sky pillar's progress bar, which is currently climbing at a rapid pace. It has already reached 17%, and she estimates it will hit 100% in just a few days. As for this cloud knot, it could be used to charge the sky pillar during the flying rain season. Whether this treasure is truly powerful or not depends entirely on the strength of the sky pillar itself. Meanwhile, deep within the great road of eternal night, a middle-aged man named Tanchi sits on the ground. He slowly opens his eyes and looks into the darkness, sensing that someone has arrived. A deep, heavy voice suddenly echoes from the shadows, reminding him that he has been trapped here for 38 years. The voice asks if he is still unwilling to answer a very simple question that would cause him no harm. The man, still deep in his cultivation, suddenly breaks into a smile. He can hear the underlying desperation in the visitor's voice, a certain rushed tone that betrays their anxiety. It seems the situation on the Eternal Night front isn't looking good for the ghost race. The voice in the dark doesn't even try to deny it. It frankly admits that the defenses at the front are extremely tight and difficult to breach, though it claims it won't be long now. The voice argues that human strength is limited, and the ghost race isn't as tyrannical as humans imagine. They simply want a place to live. It offers a deal. If he reveals the location of that other continent, the ghost race might abandon their current invasion and go there instead. The voice suggests this would be better for everyone, but Tanchi only lets out a soft, mocking laugh and says nothing, leaving the darkness silent. Perhaps realizing that being forceful isn't working, the voice softens its tone, noting that he doesn't bear the heavenly mark of this world. It acknowledges that he isn't from the Eternal Night Road, but from another land entirely, a place the ghost race never knew existed until now. He has brought new hope to the ghost race. He is special, and while they cannot kill him, they know his time is not infinite. The voice asks if he truly intends to stay trapped here until his life fades away, but the middle-aged man only laughs in response. 38 years, Tanchi notes, and you've never explored outward? The eternal night doesn't limit you. The voice admits the night is free, but the eternal day is a different story. If a ghost appears under the sun, regardless of their power, they are burned to ash instantly. Only the great ghosts can step onto the great road at dusk. The voice in the dark sounds frustrated, explaining that over the years, the ghost race has sent countless elites across the sea by every means possible, losing an untold number of their strongest in the process. But all they found was an endless expanse of thunderstorms. To be honest, it's a death trap. If you're caught in those waves, you'll be trapped forever, suffering endless torment. We learn they suspect this infinite storm actually encircles the entire great road of eternal night. The voice laments that if those lost great ghosts had been sent to the front lines instead, they might have already conquered the human realm. Tanchi laughs again, looking down to casually fiddle with the scales of the sky-swallowing crocodile resting beside him. Don't romanticize a path you haven't walked, he remarks dryly. Who's to say the outcome wouldn't have been even worse? At least you saw the storm. The view was nice, wasn't it? Seeing that Tanchi has no intention of talking, the visitor falls silent. After a long pause, the presence in the darkness finally fades away. Tanchi remains seated on the ground, seemingly at peace. He continues to stroke the crocodile's scales, though his gaze begins to drift as his mind wanders to distant memories. You see, he isn't actually from the Great Road, and to be perfectly honest, he isn't even human. He is a unique being born of pure chance. In this entire world, he is likely the only one of his kind. He has no home left, and now, his only lingering obsession is to use his remaining strength to protect the Great Road. The end result might be grim, but he has given it his all. Boss, the large sky-swallowing crocodile finally rumbles in a thick voice once the shadow is gone. Is it true you can't die? Of course, Tanchi replies with a soft smile. When the beast asks how that's possible, the man pauses for a long moment. Because, he says quietly, a very, very long time ago, I already died. Which, naturally, makes dying again quite difficult. He admits he doesn't even know what state he's in now, though he finds having emotions and the ability to think rather pleasant. The crocodile is puzzled. Boss, you're so incredibly strong. How did anyone manage to kill you back then? No one killed me, Tanchi clarifies. When the puzzled beast asks how he died then, he simply says he self-detonated. Yes, he blew himself up. The massive sky-swallowing crocodile resting at his feet looks up, its eyes gleaming with a sudden, intense spark of admiration for its master. The power of your explosion must have been incredible. Tanchi laughs, using an exaggerated tone as he begins to gesture wildly with his hands. It was this big, he says, claiming it was enough to sink the entire continent. The crocodile, of course, doesn't realize he's joking. Instead of catching the irony, the beast sighs with genuine longing, thinking that such a grand end is exactly how a true hero should go out. Tanchi can't help but shake his head and chuckle. Having these two crocodiles by his side all these years has certainly changed him. He realizes he laughs far more often now than he ever did before. But after a brief pause, his voice turns low and complicated again. It wasn't as glorious as you imagine, he admits. I was forced into it on the verge of defeat. To be honest, it was quite pathetic. But surely you dealt the enemy a crushing blow? The crocodile asks. Tanchi nods. The enemy gained nothing, and for him, that was enough. It's a bit of a shame that the crocodile's front paws are so thick and heavy. They aren't exactly built for giving a thumbs up. Otherwise, the beast surely would have given him one right then. Tanchi just smiles and falls silent, letting the conversation drift away. He grows quiet as his thoughts wander far across time. He misses home, though, sadly, his home no longer exists in this world. As the sun begins to rise, the eternal night of the new continent slowly retreats, giving way to the first light of a new day. We see Wang Matzi emerge from the cabin, standing on the deck to gaze at a massive, seemingly bottomless pit stretching toward the horizon. The scale of the crater is so immense that, unless you were looking down from high above, you'd hardly realize it was a pit at all. This is their objective for the day. Now that the light has returned, it is finally time for them to set out and explore. Their vessel descends from the sky into the depths of the abyss. The deeper they go, the more the true scale of the crater is revealed. With only half an hour left before the eternal night returns, they finally reach the very center of this colossal depression. It has taken them an entire day of flying just to get here. On the deck, Wang Matzi carefully gives instructions to his subordinates. He looks down at the pit below, realizing this is no natural formation. And as they descend further, the truth begins to emerge. The details of the deep pit finally come into view, revealing walls that aren't rough rock, but a smooth, obsidian-like glass. It is an eerie sight. Eventually, their vessel, the Feijo, touches down at the bottom, where there are no ghosts or stones. Wang Matzi cautiously steps out of the Feijo, scanning the area. To be honest, the ground looks far more fragile than it feels. Despite its appearance, the surface is incredibly solid underfoot. He orders his men to pair up and begin exploring the abyss. They have lost contact with Fanyu for now, but he plans to send word back once the exploration is complete. 3 days pass. We see Chen Fan sitting on the city wall, his brow furrowed in concern. Wang Matzi has been missing for 3 days now. He wonders if they've met with danger, especially now that 3 days have already passed since the end of the rainy season. Mining operations on the new continent are proceeding normally, yet the silence from Wang Matzi continues to weigh on him. The last message he received before the blackout was brief, leaving him with more questions than answers. Finally, word arrives that everyone has returned safely, though Wang Matzi is weak from hunger. Chen Fan finally breathes a sigh of relief. He tells himself that coming back alive is what matters. He'll wait for Wang Matzi to recover before asking how he managed to starve. Afterward, he turns his attention to the sky-piercing pillar atop Nameless Mountain, designed to draw lightning during the rainy season. It gathers energy to be unleashed against enemies, with a strike range that extends far beyond the borders of their camp. To upgrade it to the next level requires 10,000 ghost stones, and the storage progress has currently reached 100%. By last night, the pillar was fully charged. Now, he is ready to see exactly what kind of power this monument truly holds. Soon, Chen Fan arrives at the peak of Nameless Mountain. We see the control panel for the sky-piercing pillar flickering to life. The display shows a bird's-eye view of the Jiangbei wasteland, laid out like a tactical map before his very eyes. He gazes at the translucent map floating in front of him, its rings of light pulsing with a steady, rhythmic glow. Tentatively, he taps a location on the Jiangbei wasteland. In an instant, the map responds to his touch. A line of crimson text appears, coordinates selected. Confirm launch? He hesitates for only a second before giving the order to fire. Chen Fan stands frozen in place, his eyes wide with confusion as he stares at the sky-piercing pillar's control panel. It was supposed to store lightning to strike enemies, and he expected something like a defensive tower, but the reality is quite different. He finds himself wondering what the word launch actually implies as his gaze lingers on the small text at the bottom. The attack range extends far beyond the camp's borders, a fact that forces him to take a long, deep breath. He checks his selected coordinates once more, confirming the target is a desolate patch of the Jiangbei wasteland. It sits over 10 kilometers away from Fanyu's defensive line, a distance where he is certain no one should be. After all, nobody would wander out here during the rainy season, or so he hopes, as he pulls out the ghost skin map. Only after confirming no ghost fires are burning in the area does he relax, fearing he might accidentally blow someone up. He reaches out and presses the launch button on the translucent map, and in that very moment, everything changes. The ground atop Nameless Mountain begins to tremble violently beneath the massive, 100-meter-tall pillar. The structure itself starts vibrating at an incredibly high frequency, which, to be honest, is a bit more than he bargained for. Without a second thought, he dives into his 95 dragon armor and retreats as fast as he can to a safe distance. The earth gives one final, massive heave, and we see the towering pillar begin its true transformation. The intricate patterns carved into its surface begin to glow, starting from the base and racing toward the summit. In the blink of an eye, the entire pillar is illuminated, shining with a blinding light through the heavy rain. As the glow reaches its peak, the outer shell of the pillar begins to crack and fall away in massive chunks. The debris crashes onto the slopes of Nameless Mountain, revealing a slender, inner core now hovering in the air. This new structure is a perfectly straight, circular column about 10 meters high, having shed its heavy outer skin. The core is translucent and crystal clear, allowing us to see countless bolts of lightning swirling madly within. At the base of this pillar, a torrent of electrical energy begins to surge outward, preparing for the final release. This surge provides the necessary thrust for the circular column, which begins to ascend, gaining speed faster and faster with every passing second. It vanishes into the thick clouds, but soon enough, we see the cylinder reappear over 10 kilometers away in the distance. It arches through the sky like a diving predator, reaching an incredible velocity as it plunges straight toward the earth below. With a power that seems capable of destroying the world, it pierces through the forest canopy and slams into the ground. The first thing we notice is the blue, a pure, intense light mixed with pale white as countless lightning bolts explode within the woods. A pillar of light shoots upward, followed by a deafening roar of thunder that puts the natural storms of the rainy season to shame. It sounds as if months of accumulated lightning have finally been unleashed all at once, prompting Chen Fan to step out of his armor. He stares in a daze at the violent electrical storm raging in the distant forest, then glances back at the debris scattered nearby. To be honest, he never expected that launching the pillar meant literally firing the entire structure like a projectile. He had assumed it would simply fire bolts of lightning, but it seems this massive outer shell was merely a charging station. The true weapon was that smaller, translucent core we saw earlier, which acted as the actual storage vessel for the energy. Without wasting a moment, Chun Fan boards his 95 dragon armor and flies down from Nameless Mountain to investigate the impact site. A short while later, he arrives at the scene and finds himself standing before a massive crater over 10 meters wide. Even though some time has passed, residual arcs of electricity still flicker across the surface of the pit, crackling with leftover power. Standing atop his armor, he gazes down at the shimmering edges of the crater and feels a sudden, strange pang of regret. He finds himself wishing he hadn't killed that great ghost so quickly. He should have kept it captive just to test this weapon. He wonders if this lightning-filled pillar could actually threaten a high-level entity, and secretly hopes another one might show up soon. After all, he needs live targets to truly understand the destructive potential of Fanyu's various defensive buildings. Deciding it is time to return, he heads back toward Nameless Mountain with a new, somewhat ambitious plan in mind. He intends to cover the mountain in these pillars, realizing they aren't just towers, they are essentially long-range cruise missiles. We find Chen Fan standing at the edge of the Fanyu barrier, where he looks around and nods with a quiet sense of satisfaction. A panel slowly flickers to life before him, announcing that the sky-piercing pillar has reached level 10, its absolute maximum level. He has unlocked the devastation effect, significantly boosting its power. This marks Fanyu's 11th building to reach its peak state. To be honest, it is the first time he has seen such a blunt description, devastation, and power increase. It certainly gets straight to the point. He checks the interface and notices that this level 10 pillar has a total energy capacity of 10,000 units, currently sitting at 0. A level 1 pillar only required 100 units, meaning this version is 100 times more powerful, at least in theory. Naturally, this also means the charging time has increased 100-fold. In this realm, it previously took him 3 full days. That was just to fill a level 1 pillar. By his current calculations, fully charging a level 10 version would be a much longer endeavor. It would take 300 days here, which translates to 10 years in the outside world. 10 years. Chen Fan falls into a thoughtful silence. While the pillar would become a weapon of mass destruction in a decade, the undersea ghost nests are scheduled to invade in just 3 years. He was counting on these pillars for that grand debut and simply cannot wait that long. However, a sudden smile crosses his face. As luck would have it, he recently acquired a treasure called the Cloud Stitcher, which allows him to control localized weather patterns. This should drastically speed up the charging process, though he will have to wait until this trial ends to experiment and see exactly how fast. For now, he focuses on construction. After spending 4.5 million ghost coins, he manages to complete 10 max-level pillars. Next, he pulls the Cloud Stitcher from his robes and tosses it into the air. In the blink of an eye, the transformation begins. The small treasure expands rapidly as it ascends, with arcs of lightning beginning to dance and flicker within its growing mass. Rain begins to fall, punctuated by frequent lightning strikes. Only after setting this in motion does Chun Fan look upon the scene. He nods, pleased. The Cloud Stitcher covers a vast area, more than enough to encompass all 10 of these max-level pillars. In fact, there is room for 4 or 5 more in this zone. He decides this specific area will be reserved for the highest-tier structures. Outside this storm zone, he won't build max-level pillars. Instead, he will build standard ones that can fully charge within the 3-year window. After a considerable amount of time has passed, we find Chun Fan standing still, his hands resting firmly on his hips, breathing slightly heavily. He gazes at the forest of sky-piercing pillars he has built and smiles with deep satisfaction. 3 years from now, these pillars will have their day of activation. He nods, grinning at the thought of it. He truly likes these structures, though he finds the name Sky-Piercing Pillar a bit unfitting as he rests his chin on his hand. He reaches a decision quickly and nods. He will call them Fanyu cruise missiles instead. Just then, something interrupts his thoughts. The transmission talisman in his robes grows hot, and Shueho's panicked voice crackles through, calling out for the young master. It seems Wang Matzi has mostly recovered physically, but his expression is one of pure terror, as if he has seen a ghost. He insists on reporting to Chun Fan in person and is taking the high-speed rail back to Fanyu immediately. Chun Fan's brow furrows. It sounds as though something major has occurred. After one last look at his pillars, he strides toward the harbor. By the time he steps off the train at the new continent, it is already afternoon, but he doesn't seek out Wang Matzi immediately. Instead, we see him standing on the walls of Base 1, surveying the landscape outside with a watchful eye. Only after a full scan does he turn to the limping Keiho and tell him it's time to find Wang Matzi. Keiho leads the way to a nearby water well, looking toward Wang Matzi with a sense of utter helplessness. Chun Fan's frown deepens. Wang Matzi's state is indeed concerning, far different from when they last met on the new continent. Back then, Chun Fan had built several wells for fresh water, and now Wang Matzi is slumped over the edge, staring into the depths. He looks possessed, to be honest. Chun Fan leans his emerald cane against a nearby table and steps forward. He pours a bowl of tea for himself and another for Wang Matzi, standing beside the man and speaking in a soft, calm voice. He tells Wang Matzi that he is here and to speak slowly, noting that the man has lost his usual composure. As the words fall, Wang Matzi, his body still clearly weakened, suddenly spins around to face Chun Fan. His hands tremble as he takes the tea, tears shimmering in his eyes as he whispers, "Jade Lord, I have become the heavenly Tao." The tea Chun Fan had just sipped didn't stay down for long. He sprayed it all over Wang Matzi's face in a moment of pure shock. After a long, heavy silence, Chun Fan took a deep breath, set his tea bowl aside, and sat by the well, speaking softly. He asked if Wang Matzi had encountered a spirit capable of creating illusions, urging him to explain everything, because becoming the heavenly Tao was simply absurd. He suspected the man was possessed, but perhaps thanks to the tea bath, Wang Matzi seemed much calmer now as he began to explain. He drifted into memory, recalling how 3 days ago, under the Lord's orders, he led the Merchant Pavilion members to explore the new continent's depths. They discovered a massive crater, and it took them an entire day of flying just to reach the very center of the abyss. The ground inside felt like obsidian, smooth and glass-like as if formed by a massive impact. Once they landed, the investigation began. He had ordered the members to search in pairs, but at that exact moment, he felt a powerful suction pulling at him from below. A crack suddenly split the ground in the center of the crater, and before he could react, it swallowed him whole. When he finally opened his eyes, he found himself deep underground in a rocky cavern with no visible exits or openings. Strangely, his breathing remained normal and he felt no discomfort. Once fully awake, he tried to reach out for help. His first instinct was to use a transmission talisman to contact the team above, but it was completely useless, and not because of the distance. It simply wouldn't activate. The cave was small and entirely empty, but then, something caught his eye on the rocky wall. He saw a line of carved text, not any language they knew, but something resembling a child's messy, chaotic scribbles. Yet, the moment he looked at those characters, he was pulled into a vision where his consciousness drifted high into the sky. He floated higher and higher until he was looking down upon the entire new continent. Here, Wang Matzi paused, his breath hitching. His body began to tremble again as he stood up, whispering that he had seen their world as it was thousands of years ago. He saw 7 defensive lines stretching for thousands of kilometers, standing like heavenly barriers along the coastline. Behind those walls, countless people were tirelessly transporting supplies, while outside the defenses, the view was far more grim. A sea of ghosts blotted out the very sky, their numbers beyond counting, and in that moment, he saw every corner of the new continent. Every line was being hammered by massive ghost nests simultaneously. He watched for an eternity as the new continent slowly grew cold. One by one, the ghost fires flickered out until eternal night covered the land, leaving only one final, desperate region remaining. A few survivors huddled behind the walls for a final stand, and that was when he saw a monstrosity emerge from the ghost nest. The creature stood dozens of meters tall with 3 heads and 6 arms, each hand gripping a massive, terrifying hammer. This giant entity looked up, its voice booming across the heavens and earth as it asked him a single, chilling question. It asked if he was willing to become the heavenly Tao of the ghost race, and he could feel its gaze locked directly onto him. In that moment, he realized that his bird's-eye view of the entire continent was, in fact, the perspective of the heavenly Tao itself. He tried to speak, his mouth moving in silence, but his body felt completely beyond his control, which, naturally, was a terrifying sensation. He took one last look at the continent being swallowed by darkness, let out a sudden laugh, and then he simply exploded. A massive blast and bone-chilling pain ripped through him. The last thing he saw before blacking out was that colossal explosion. The blast carved a deep crater into the plains, and simultaneously, a flood of multicolored light erupted from the center. The light swept across the continent, and the three-headed, six-armed ghost was instantly reduced to a puddle of bloody filth. Every ghost touched by that light dissolved into gore, and tragically, the remaining humans met the exact same fate. The ghosts further out, who hadn't yet landed, fled in a blind panic toward the distant, storm-tossed waters of the Thunder Sea. The multicolored light dissipated upon hitting the sea, allowing only a small fraction of the ghosts to escape into the waves. When he finally woke up, he was back in the crater. The Merchant Pavilion members said they had been searching for him for 3 days. They found him at the very center of the abyss where he had vanished and were now bringing him back home. His first instinct upon waking was to tell Yuju everything. Having finally finished his story, Wang Matzi seemed much more relaxed. To a local like Wang Matzi, the term Heavenly Tao was synonymous with a supreme god, a concept that usually inspired pure dread. Imagine the shock of not just hearing the word, but actually experiencing the world through the very eyes of such a being. Chun Fan stood there in a heavy, expressionless silence, processing the fact that Wang Matzi hadn't actually become the Heavenly Tao. Instead, he had simply entered the Heavenly Tao's perspective to witness the final, desperate battle of the new continent firsthand. It was much like when Chun Fan used the Immortal Master's foresight to see the ancient fall of Jiangbei. While such visions are common enough, the difference was striking. Chun Fan saw through a master, but Wang Matzi saw through a god. After a long silence, Chun Fan finally turned to Wang Matzi with a complicated expression and spoke softly. He noted that the multicolored light from the Heavenly Tao's self-destruction had covered the entire continent and the surrounding seas. Since that light was powerful enough to annihilate every ghost in its path, its destructive force was clearly beyond measure. Yet, the Thunder Sea had managed to withstand that blast and even provided a safe haven for the surviving ghosts. This alone proved how terrifying that sea truly was, leading Chun Fan to ask a very practical question. He asked how Wang Matzi had managed to cross such a place twice. Wang Matzi froze as the absurdity of his journey finally hit him. It seemed he had done something completely ridiculous, and he spent a long moment lost in thought before finally answering. He explained that he simply sailed through. Even though the rain was heavy, the wind was fierce, and lightning flashed constantly. But strangely, the lightning never struck the ship, and the ghosts within the Thunder Sea never attacked them. As long as the waves didn't capsize the boat, one could make it across, or so he claimed, while Chun Fan remained silent. If only it were truly that simple. Deep down, Chun Fan suspected Wang Matzi possessed a truly terrifying amount of luck. He likely stumbled upon the only safe path through the Thunder Sea twice by pure accident, which is quite a feat. After a long pause, Chun Fan patted Wang Matzi on the shoulder and offered a small, reassuring smile. He told him to relax, as he had only witnessed the end of a war through a divine lens and shouldn't be so terrified. However, Chun Fan knew they had to move faster, lest the Heavenly Tao of the Eternal Night continent decide to self-destruct as well. That would be a disaster, to say the least. Wang Matzi nodded, feeling lighter after sharing his burden with Yuju and Chun Fan. Wang Matzi felt much better after speaking, and he promptly handed the map marking the ancient battlefield's location over to Chun Fan. With that matter settled, we see Wei Wei board the flying beast Feizhou to embark on an exploration journey alongside the Merchant Pavilion. Their target this time was the massive crater that Wang Matzi had only just finished exploring. Wei Wei spent the entire trip clinging to Feizhou, gasping with excitement at the sensation of flying, until they had traveled for 3 days. As the outline of the deep pit gradually came into view, the joy in his lantern-sized eyes suddenly began to freeze in place. At that moment, he had only one thought: please, let there be no earth essence. If he found any, he would have to dig and dig. He wondered just how long such a task would take, but as Feizhou landed on the edge of the pit, Wei Wei scrambled down anxiously. He looked down at the heavy clusters of earth essence, then lifted his flat head to gaze at the seemingly endless expanse of the crater. For the first time, a very human-like expression of despair appeared in his eyes. There was earth essence here, and in massive quantities. The rest of the group stepped off Feizhou and stood at the edge of the abyss, taking in the sight. Wang Matzi took a deep breath and quickly made a decision. They would return immediately, so he could report to the master in person. This was a major discovery that required a face-to-face meeting. 3 days later, we find that Chun Fan had already returned to Fanyu. He was busy handling the camp's affairs when the transmission talisman in his pocket grew warm. It was Wang Matzi calling. The report was staggering. They had found a massive yield of earth essence in the pit, and Chun Fan's eyes lit up at the news. He laughed, thinking how wonderful an unclaimed continent truly was. With no one to fight, everything was as by default, a good thing indeed. The Merchant Pavilion had done well, but their primary means of extraction was Wei Wei, and they had no better way to mine it. Wang Matzi noted that Wei Wei's current mental state was one of complete shock. To mine everything there would be a monumental task. It would likely take nearly 10 years of hard labor, a fact that made Chun Fan's mouth twitch as he realized he had forgotten one detail. A crater created by a god's self-destruction wouldn't be small, and sending Weiwei to dig it alone was certainly giving him a job for life. Weiwei would essentially spend half his life in that pit, digging slowly until the end of time, but that would have to wait. After cutting off the transmission with Wang Matzi, he wondered if a drill bit forged from Earth Essence could speed up the excavation. Zhao Xingping's reply through the talisman was firm and decisive, though his voice betrayed a hint of confusion at the request. Earth Essence is a top-tier material, and a tool made from it would certainly speed things up, but there was a catch. To use such a treasure for a simple drill bit was, quite frankly, a scandalous waste of resources, a fact Chen Fan noted before hanging up. He reconnected with Wang Matzi to soothe Weiwei's frayed nerves, telling him that he didn't need to mine the entire crater at once. He only needed to extract a portion for now. The rest could wait for another time when they weren't in such a rush. The message was clear. There was no need to finish it all today, as they could return to dig slowly whenever they had the chance. Time passed quietly in this peaceful manner, and before we knew it, 20 days had vanished as the dark clouds finally began to disperse. The rainy season was over, and on the very first day of clear skies, Jiangbei slowly began to regain its former bustling energy. Leaning on his jade cane, Chen Fan stood atop the defensive walls of the rainy season line, gazing up at the long-awaited clear blue sky. He looked out over the distant Jiangbei wilderness and chuckled softly to himself, saying nothing as he enjoyed the view. During this past month, without any outside interference, Fanyu had developed rapidly, and the mining progress on the new continent was equally pleasing. With the rains gone, news of Jiangbei Fanyu began to circulate among the various factions across the Guanxi Plains. As it turns out, the one who knows the most about Jiangbei and Fanyu is the Holy Lord of the Immortal Slaughtering Emperor. At this moment, he sat silently at his tea table, his mouth twitching uncontrollably as he read through the reports delivered by his subordinates. Over a decade ago, he had learned that a certain powerful figure had left Nameless Mountain and become trapped elsewhere. That figure had left behind a grand formation capable of cultivating snow lotuses, and the Holy Lord felt that finders should be keepers. Believing it would be a sin to ignore such a gift from heaven, he had personally dispatched a team, led by Yuninger, to go there. They had lurked in Jiangbei City, near the Qin family, waiting for the very moment the snow lotuses matured to snatch them away. It was a perfect plan, and he had even sent Xiaoqiu, the man who founded the God Testing Hall, along with a group of others to ensure success. However, during the last rainy season, Yuninger's life tablet shattered, and soon after, the tablets of everyone else in the group followed suit. As for Xiaoqiu, he was presumed dead as well. Though the Holy Lord didn't hold his tablet, he knew the team's fate was sealed. Even so, he hadn't sent anyone else to Nameless Mountain, as the mission to retrieve those snow lotuses was ranked quite low. It simply wasn't worth the extra effort, and he had nearly forgotten the entire affair, until very recently, that is. Word reached him of Fanyu's sudden rise, and that its leader, Chen Fan, was the very same illegitimate son exiled by the Qin family. The Holy Lord of the Immortal Slaughtering Emperor sat at his tea table, carefully trying to piece together the logic of these connections. He needed to determine if Fanyu and his own sect were now enemies, though he told himself there was likely no grudge. After all, he hadn't authorized Chen Fan's exile, yet a lingering fear of Fanyu's power made him hesitate for a long moment. Finally, the Holy Lord let out a long sigh of relief and began to laugh, convinced that no real enmity existed between them. He reasoned that those past events couldn't possibly be blamed on his sect, but just then, the tea room door swung open. Another report was dropped onto his table, revealing that the master of Fanyu's hidden pavilion was none other than Xiaoqiu. The smile on his face froze instantly. Xiaoqiu wasn't dead at all, and he had apparently joined Fanyu's ranks. He wondered if this meant they were enemies now, though he quickly tried to rationalize that imprisoning an intruder was perfectly fair. Xiaoqiu had sneaked into his sect first, so a little light imprisonment shouldn't be taken personally, or so he hoped. He muttered to himself that any grudge should remain between Xiaoqiu and the sect, without dragging Fanyu into the mess. The Great Elder sat nearby with a completely expressionless face, having long ago grown accustomed to the Holy Lord's eccentric way of doing business. 3 more days passed, and as the rainy season ended, a cold wind began to blow from Jiangbei toward the Guanxi Plains. Riding that wind was the news of Fanyu, and almost overnight, the people of the plains learned of this mysterious rising power. Meanwhile, in a mortal city located right next to the Immortal Slaughtering Emperor's territory, we find a familiar face. Xiaoqiu was there, leading the members of the hidden pavilion from the top floor of the city's most prestigious tea house. Looking out through the window at the distant mountain peak, his eyes were filled with a restless urge to test himself once more. That peak belonged to the Immortal Slaughtering Emperor. 8 years ago, his attempt to infiltrate the sect had ended in total failure. Now, however, his cultivation had long since surpassed the 5 kings, reaching the formidable level of 14. Equipped with a specialized brick and a night-walking suit crafted by goblins, he desperately wanted to see if he could finally slip inside. Unfortunately, he was on a mission to the Guanxi Plains and couldn't afford any distractions, so he told himself it was time to move on. He set down his teacup, stepped out of the private room, and began making his way downstairs to depart. His current task was to investigate the coastal defense lines of the Guanxi Plains, requiring him to travel steadily southward. The goal was to gather as much intelligence as possible before returning to Fanyu to report before the next rainy season began. Another month passed, and we see that Xiaoqiu and his team had finally reached the desolate outpost known as Ghost Town Pass. Complaining that his backside felt like it was splitting in two, Xiaoqiu hopped off his skeletal horse and looked toward the ruins ahead. Beyond this point lay the Guanxi Plains. The pass was little more than a defensive ruin, so he decided they should find a place to rest. Leading his skeletal horse, he strode toward a station built beneath the rubble, where a waiter quickly rushed out to greet them. The waiter was unusually enthusiastic as he led Xiaoqiu's group into the inn, giving them a knowing, suggestive look as they entered. He asked if the gentlemen were looking for a bit of fun to pass the time, causing Xiaoqiu to let out a weary sigh. The service here was certainly unique, as even a temporary rest stop seemed to be competing with the local brothels for business. The waiter offered to find them some company, asking if they preferred someone young or more mature, but Xiaoqiu quickly corrected him. The waiter insisted he had been misunderstood, explaining they didn't offer that kind of entertainment, and invited them to the backyard instead. Curious, Xiaoqiu decided to see what the fuss was about, and the group followed the waiter through the narrow corridors. A wave of rowdy noise soon reached their ears as they found nearly 100 people gathered around an octagonal cage, cheering wildly. Inside the cage, two monstrous spirits were snarling and snapping at each other, their bodies already drenched in blood from the fight. The creatures were covered in scars and clearly on the verge of death. "Gentlemen, this is ghost fighting," the waiter explained, "and you can place your bets before we begin." He encouraged them to wager on which spirit would emerge victorious, while he continued his enthusiastic introduction. Xiaoqiu, however, stood there completely stunned, looking up at the sun hanging high in the sky. It wasn't even dusk yet. The things in the cage weren't even high-level spirits. His master had sent him to check the war situation in the Guanxi Plains, and looking at this scene, it seemed the plains were far from falling. They were catching spirits for sport. At this rate, a counteroffensive seemed imminent. Eternal night hadn't even arrived yet, so he was utterly baffled as to how these spirits were out in the open. To be honest, he had never seen anything like this in his entire life. The waiter chuckled with a hint of pride, claiming this was the only place of its kind. He boasted that in the entire Eternal Night continent, you wouldn't find another spot for ghost fighting, noting that many guests traveled from afar just for this. He asked if they found it rare and suggested they try a hand at it, offering to find them a table and have meat and wine brought over. Xiaoqiu didn't say a word. Instead, he silently pulled a small notebook from his robes. These were all details he needed to report back. The world outside was becoming far too chaotic, and he carefully recorded the information. Only then did Xiaoqiu look back at the cage with a deep frown, watching the two mindless, wounded spirits as they continued to roar at one another. He wondered if some rare treasure was being used, as the continent was vast enough for such things to exist, allowing spirits to move in daylight. The waiter laughed and shook his head, making no effort to hide the truth of the matter. He explained that therein sat right on the edge of the Ghost Pass ruins, and these spirits could only survive during the day in the Guanxi Plains area. If they were brought even a few steps further inland, they would instantly drop dead. Apparently, this was impossible before, but after the last rainy season, scattered groups of spirits that could survive the daylight began appearing in the plains. Xiaoqiu remained silent, his brow furrowed in deep thought. No matter how he looked at it, this situation was anything but normal. He couldn't understand how these people had the leisure to enjoy such games when spirits surviving in the sun was a catastrophic sign for the continent. It was supposed to be impossible for spirits to exist in the daylight, unless, of course, something fundamental was changing. Unless half of the Guangdong Garden has already fallen, such a massive breach shouldn't exist. If the 7th defense line collapses, countless ghost nests will have an open path to march north, reaching the gates of Jiangbei in no time at all. Every living soul along that path would perish, making it vital to investigate the true status of the Guangdong Garden's 7th defense line. While he worried over the situation, we shift our focus elsewhere, where a full month has passed since the end of the rainy season. During this month, Chun Fan has burned through a staggering 356 million ghost stones to fuel his grand ambitions. He has extended the original 14.8-kilometer rainy season line to 114.8 kilometers, leaving only 55.2 kilometers to go. Once finished, the entire prototype for his Jiangbei defense line will be complete, but he has finally run out of ghost stones. Now, he simply needs to wait for the new continent's supplies to finish the job. 1 month later, Chun Fan woke up early and, feeling quite cheerful, checked the ghost stone reserves within the Fanyu warehouse. He then made his way toward the fortifications. By now, the rainy season line has been officially renamed the Jiangbei defense line. It no longer just circles the Fanyu territory. It stands as a nearly straight line guarding the entire Jiangbei coastline. With 55.2 kilometers remaining, Chun Fan mounted his skeleton horse and stood at the very edge of the current fortifications. He took a deep breath, staring into the empty expanse ahead, before his skeletal steed began to gallop forward at full speed. Just as the horse's hooves were about to hit thin air, a level 5 wall materialized instantly to catch them. The horse surged ahead as if running on a bridge of light. With every single stride, a new section of wall appeared beneath them. He continued until the sky began to darken, finally dismounting to stand atop the newly formed battlements. He looked toward a towering mountain peak in the distance, where the Jiangbei defense line would finally anchor itself. This final 55.2-kilometer stretch cost him nearly 200 million ghost stones, but at last, the work was done. The 170-kilometer prototype of the Jiangbei defense line was complete, and Chun Fan stood tall upon his creation. He watched the fading light of dusk, glancing at the massive mountain peak that now served as the terminal for his Great Wall. He gazed out at the churning surface of the sea nearby, and after a long moment, turned back to look at the endless defense line stretching behind him. A smile touched his lips. It had taken a year and a half, but the 170-kilometer Jiangbei defense line was finally a reality. It was a uniform masterpiece of level 5 walls, etched with ghost hole patterns and cleared of all obstructions. This defense line, which could only be described as a miracle, was finished. Fan Yu would be ready when the undersea ghost nests landed in 2.5 years. He was prepared to guard Jiangbei, though he knew that if the undersea nests didn't arrive early, he could do even more. His next goal was to upgrade the entire line to level 6 to ensure absolute safety. With that thought, Chun Fan quickly returned to Wuming Mountain. As the sky gradually darkened, the fatigue of a long day's work began to set in, so he brewed himself a pot of hot tea. He sat atop the wall of cave number 1, listening to Wang Kuei provide a report. "Master," Wang Kuei began, standing respectfully by his side. It was now early March, the very start of spring, and the mining progress on the new continent was going well without any unexpected incidents. However, they still hadn't found a chicken to slaughter on the Guanxi Plains. Meanwhile, Emperor Tuxian had sent people to Fan Yu with compensation for the bandits. The emperor had also written a letter, thousands of words long, insisting that there was no real hatred between Fan Yu and the Tuxian Empire. He claimed it was all just a series of misunderstandings and offered ghost stones to settle the matter. Chun Fan leaned back, his lip twitching slightly. His original plan had been disrupted. It was a simple strategy, really: kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. He had intended to use thunderous force to crush a power in the Guanxi Plains, thereby deterring any other factions that were beginning to stir. He had already picked his chicken, Emperor Tuxian, who had once sent men to plot for the Snow Lotus of Wuming Mountain. But the emperor's recent behavior was making him difficult to read, especially after sending 3 consecutive letters of apology. Each letter insisted they were not enemies, and each one arrived with a substantial amount of compensation. The amount was significant, and the attitude was so polite that Chun Fan felt a bit reluctant to strike. Yet, without a sacrifice, it would be difficult to demonstrate Fan Yu's true power. He had already decided how the chicken would be killed using the ghost stones he'd accumulated. He had enough to build a formidable fleet to crush his enemies with overwhelming force. That was his primary focus. He looked down at the letter in his hand and let out a soft sigh, realizing that the points made within it were actually quite reasonable. It was true that Emperor Tuxian had never targeted him directly, but the indirect impact was still there, and that simply wouldn't do. After thinking it over for a long while, Chun Fan finally spoke, insisting they had to find a chicken to slaughter to show off their strength. Otherwise, the high-speed rail lines they were planning to lay across the Guanxi Plains would surely be sabotaged by every low-level thug around. He knew a display of power was necessary to deter other factions, and he vowed to find his target within a month before finally stretching his tired limbs. He stepped down from the city wall, ready to wash up and get some sleep. It had been a long day, and rest was calling. As he drifted off, he wondered how things were going with Xiaoqiu. Meanwhile, on the new continent, night had already fallen. We see a sea vessel slowly pulling into the harbor as Keiho, standing atop the wall, called out to ask about the day's progress. The returning scouts reported to the pavilion master that everything remained calm, with no signs of the thunderstorm sea collapsing just yet. Keiho gave a slight nod and gestured for the men to enter the city. Fan Yu had specifically dispatched a ship for this very purpose. Stationed near the thunderstorm sea, they monitored the area daily, ready to report the moment any signs of a collapse appeared. This would give Fan Yu the precious time needed to react. Afterward, he looked out toward the distant eternal night, his thoughts beginning to drift. It had been quite a while since he'd seen his master, and he wondered how the development of Fan Yu was progressing back home. The new continent site number 1 was operating like a machine that never slept, churning out progress day and night. Massive quantities of ghost stones and resources were being transported to Fan Yu through the undersea tunnel 2 months after the rain had ended. Deep down, he felt a longing to return to Fan Yu. Elsewhere on the new continent, aboard a vessel hovering in the sky, Wang Matzi frowned as he studied the ghost skin map in his hands. He had spent the last few months tirelessly exploring this new land. After crossing that massive crater, he had begun to notice more and more cracks appearing in the earth. They seemed to be spreading outward from the very core of the new continent, and he had the strange sensation that they were growing. The expansion was incredibly slow, almost imperceptible, but he had spent the last few days carefully tracking their progress. He wanted to find the source of these cracks and see what they truly were. But as night fell, he turned and stepped into the cabin. He decided to sleep first, leaving the rest for tomorrow. Meanwhile, on the Guanxi Plains, Xiaoqiu was leading a group of secret pavilion members. They were staying in an inn within a walled city, and his expression was quite grim. He had been away from Fanyu for 2 months now. Yesterday, he had reached the southernmost tip of the Guanxi Plains, where he saw defense line number 7, a massive wall covered in snow. It was even taller than the walls of Fanyu's rainy season defenses, a level 6 fortification that looked like a barrier from the heavens. Situated right on the coastline of the southern plains, it looked indestructible, though in reality, it had nearly fallen during the rainy season. In fact, defense line number 7 had almost completely collapsed. The Guanxi Plains had essentially been lost during those heavy rains. A massive swarm from the ghost nests had breached the line, launching a brutal slaughter across the entirety of the Guanxi Plains. Now, barely 30% of the population remained, with countless lives lost before the line was finally stabilized. Just before the plains were completely overrun, the Eternal Night Pavilion sent reinforcements to contain the ghost nest outbreak at any cost. They held out until dawn and quickly repaired defense line number 7, which is the only reason they survived the rainy season at all. If the Eternal Night Pavilion had arrived even a moment later, Fanyu itself might very well have ceased to exist. It is an incredibly vast organization, with many factions joining its ranks to help build and maintain the continent's defenses. One could say the Eternal Night Pavilion is the only reason the entire Eternal Night continent hasn't fallen yet. However, with the frontline battles becoming so desperate, even they are struggling to keep up. Xiaoqiu had heard this name before. Back before Fanyu was officially founded, when the Jade Lord asked the elders for name suggestions, Wang Matzi had proposed it. He suggested the name Eternal Night Pavilion, though Xiaoqiu wasn't there at the time, as he hadn't joined Fanyu yet. Wang Matzi mentioned it later during a casual chat, sounding a bit sentimental. While Fanyu was nice, he felt the other names sounded more dominant. Beside the pavilion master, a member of the secret pavilion leaned in and whispered anxiously, wondering if they should leave immediately. He asked if they should return to Fanyu right away to report this news, while Xiaoqiu simply glanced at his subordinate. After a brief pause, Xiaoqiu spoke softly, telling them not to worry. The pressure on the defense line only peaks during the rainy season, which has already passed. With several months left before the next rains arrive, he reasoned that defense line number 7 is unlikely to collapse in the meantime. He ordered Xiao Yi and Xiao Air to set off immediately for Fanyu to report the news, so the Jade Lord would be informed well in advance. It was better to be prepared, after all. The rest of the group would remain on the Guanxi Plains for a few months to gather more intelligence. At dawn, they would join defense line number 7 to observe it up close, and soon enough, the sun began to rise. We see Xiao Yi and Xiao Air, the 2 secret pavilion members, already galloping back toward the city on their skeletal horses. While they hurried to deliver their report, Xiaoqiu led the remaining members out of the city in disguise. They headed toward defense line number 7, just a few hundred meters away, where people were constantly hauling ghost stone weapons up to the ramparts. The remains of ghost creatures and the blood of defenders from the great battle 2 months ago still lingered on the battlefield. Though the area had been roughly cleared, the earth remained stained a strange, eerie purple-black, dotted with rows of tents and wooden huts. A long line had formed at the base of the wall. These were people waiting to enlist, as the garrison was actively recruiting new blood. Xiaoqiu and his secret pavilion members joined the queue, and soon it was his turn. His cultivation level? A martial king. The recruitment officer, who hadn't looked up once, finally raised his eyes to scan Xiaoqiu from head to toe. With a slight nod, he thanked Xiaoqiu for joining and assigned him number 179, officially part of defense line number 7. He was told to report to Team 71 of the 3rd Battalion at Wooden Hut 31 to the east, where his captain would assign his post. A moment later, we find Xiaoqiu standing atop the massive wall, silent and contemplative as he gazes out toward the sea. The ocean here is even darker than the waters of Jiangbei, the coastline beyond the defenses completely stained by the blood of ghosts. The shore was a chaotic purple-black, shimmering with strange light as people swarmed like ants to extract ghost stones from the fallen carcasses. They packed the stones into bags, a grim harvest from a line that had only recently survived a massacre. Finally, he understood. He realized why Fanyu's defenses were already so much stronger than those in the 4 regions of Jiangbei, even stronger than they had first estimated. The defenses here were already stronger than those in Jiangbei, yet the Jade Lord remained unsatisfied, as his vision extended far beyond a single region. He was looking much further ahead, considering how Fanyu might survive on its own if the Evernight front were to eventually fall. Meanwhile, within the Tuxian Holy Land on the Guanxi Plains, the Grand Elder let out a long, weary sigh while sitting at a tea table. He looked at the Holy Lord, who was busy tinkering with something, and asked in a raspy voice if he ever felt he had made a mistake. He wondered if, 8 years ago, the Holy Lord should have simply killed Xiaoqiu instead of merely taking a fragment of his soul. Perhaps then, the secret pavilion wouldn't have such a formidable leader today, and they would have one less major threat to worry about. Even if Fanyu is a rising power, the elder questioned why they had sent ghost stones 3 times. After all, those stones don't just fall from the sky. Furthermore, when Defense Line number 7 on the Guangdong Plains recently requested aid, the Holy Lord had been surprisingly generous. The elder asked, quite bluntly, if the Holy Lord felt like a wandering philanthropist, letting just anyone take resources from their treasury. The Holy Lord of the Tuxian Holy Land finally looked up at the Grand Elder with a remarkably serious expression. He reminded the elder that he had taken his position 9 years ago and asked him to consider the state of their wealth since then. He asked if the number of ghost stones in their warehouses hadn't actually increased during those 9 years, and the elder's voice grew quiet as he admitted they had. It was a strange contradiction. Despite the Holy Lord's constant spending, the Tuxian Holy Land had flourished under his rule. The Holy Lord stood up with a sigh and walked over to the window to look out at his domain. He explained that he spared Xiaoqiu partly out of respect for his talent. After all, the boy was only 17 when he founded the Shikigami Hall. With such high cultivation at that age, the Holy Lord suspected a powerful figure was backing him, and he didn't want to invite future disaster by killing him. As for the compensation sent to Fanyu, he saw it as a practical move. They had no real grudge, and a war would be far more expensive. Even if they won such a war, the amount of ghost stones consumed in the process would far exceed what they had simply given away. He then pointed out that if Defense Line number 7 were to fall, the Guanxi Plains would hardly be able to protect themselves from the aftermath. Besides, that defense line is backed by the Evernight Temple, and offending them is never a wise move for one's continued health. The Grand Elder couldn't help but ask if the Holy Lord feared offending that person by plotting against Nameless Mountain, but the Holy Lord simply smiled. With a look of absolute sincerity, he explained his logic. Since that person had been gone so long, the Snow Lotus was technically abandoned property. He argued that finders are keepers, and besides, he hadn't actually managed to take it yet, leaving the Elder twitching in silent disbelief. We see that since this Holy Lord took power, the list of enemies for the Tuxian Holy Land has grown remarkably short. In the constant chaos of the Guanxi Plains, reducing one's enemies is no small feat. It is, to be honest, quite a miracle. Whenever a conflict arises, the Holy Lord simply applies his unique logic to conclude there is no real grudge, then sends an apology and a gift. Wars that were on the brink of exploding simply vanish. Before his reign, they sent out declarations of war, but things have changed. Now, the Tuxian Holy Land primarily sends out apology letters, and strangely enough, the strategy seems to be working perfectly. While every other power in the Guanxi Plains is trapped in an endless cycle of bloody warfare, the Tuxian Holy Land has flourished in peace, watching their warehouses overflow with more ghost stones than ever before. It might be a bit embarrassing to be so humble, but it's certainly safer than catching a cold blade in the back. The Holy Lord looked serious again, noting that he had just reviewed his logic one more time. He concluded that if Fanyu tried to reach them, they would face trouble, and predicted a reply from Fanyu would arrive shortly. The Grand Elder sat back down in silence. Though he found the Holy Lord's methods bizarre, he couldn't argue with the prosperity they brought. As long as the results were good, he was content to watch, and right at that moment, a small visitor arrived. A sparrow landed on the windowsill carrying an envelope, which the Holy Lord opened to reveal a rather curious message. His expression turned slightly odd as he read about the many merchant guilds from Jiangnan currently heading toward the Guanxi Plains. It seems the leader of the Hentian sect had slaughtered a guild flying the death flag and vowed to kill any Jiangnan merchant who dared enter. That particular guild belonged to the Gongyang clan of Jiangnan, who were merely transporting a shipment of skeleton horses southward. The Grand Elder remained calm, noting that he too had heard rumors of these developments circulating in the markets recently. It turns out there was one cheap skeleton horse too many, and since the Hentian sect sells those very horses, they felt their business was being threatened. Naturally, they weren't happy and decided some killing was in order, which the Holy Lord noted with a click of his tongue, though he felt something was off. The Grand Elder shook his head, admitting that while he couldn't always decipher the Holy Lord's unique style, the logic here seemed a bit of a stretch. He argued that he understood how other leaders thought, and Fanyu would never stick his neck out for something so trivial. After all, the people who died weren't Fanyu's people, so getting involved would be meaningless, or so the Elder thought, until the Holy Lord reconsidered his logic. He explained that if Fanyu wanted to extend his high-speed rail line into the Guanxi Plains, he would need to kill a chicken to scare the monkeys. Without a show of force, that rail line would be far too vulnerable, though the Elder doubted the Hentian sect was a small enough chicken for the job. The Holy Lord let out a dark little chuckle, noting that it all depends on who is looking. A power that rises so quickly must have some hidden tricks. He then handed over a fresh document, explaining it was a new apology letter he had just finished writing to be sent to Fanyu immediately. The Elder remarked that the Holy Lord's letter-writing posture was becoming quite elegant, a result, naturally, of constant practice. But there was another letter for the Hentian sect, also an apology, regarding a conflict between their disciples and those of the Tuxian Holy Land. The Elder pointed out that the incident happened 6 months ago, but the Holy Lord insisted on sending it anyway. He worried that if a real war broke out and the Hention sect somehow won, it would be better to have an apology already on the record. He even included some ghost stones, because as we know, an apology with empty hands is no apology at all. The Holy Lord sighed, noting that such hard work was necessary for the Holy Land's development, while elsewhere, Fanxing sat quietly in a tea house. Ganyangyu, who had been chatting with Dayu, suddenly felt the communication talisman in his robe grow warm and smiled at the news he received. After a long silence, he stood up and looked down at Dayu with a sudden grin, asking if she would ever leave Fanyu to wander the world with him. Dayu simply shook her head and said no, a blunt answer, to be sure, but an honest one. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes as she looked at him, and after a brief pause, Ganyangyu decided to drop the subject. He forced a smile and waved her off, heading out of the tea house while claiming he had family matters that required his immediate attention. The moment for him to be activated had finally arrived, though this time, he found himself strangely reluctant to answer the call. Dayu watched Ganyang's retreating figure, and as the realization hit her, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes. She dashed out of the tea house toward the Wooming Mountain secret office, certain that something terrible had happened to the Ganyang clan. That office handled Fanyu's intelligence, and she needed to know if Ganyangyu was truly about to be deployed for a mission. Inside the Ganyang clan's Shadow City, a subordinate asked the family head if they should seek Fanyu's help as he was already on his way back. We see the city itself, a fortress crafted from refined essence and adorned with intricate green vine patterns. All the elders of the Ganyang clan had gathered for an emergency meeting after receiving news that their merchant caravan had been targeted. It seems their entire trade group had been wiped out by a powerful force from the Guanxi Plains known as the Hention sect. The head of the Ganyang clan sat in his high chair, his expression grim as he weighed every word carefully. He argued that Fanyu would never go to war with a top-tier power like the Hention sect just for their sake, and asking would be futile. If they were rejected, it would not only bring shame to the clan, but also make Ganyang's position in Fanyu completely untenable. He had already consulted the Supreme Elder, who was ready to be activated at any moment, insisting they must strike back immediately. The surrounding elders remained silent, knowing deep down that even if the Supreme Elder moved, the odds were stacked against them. A single guardian could do very little against such a massive sect, and the attempt would likely result in nothing but further loss. Since the family head's mind was made up, they said no more, until a sudden, low humming sound echoed from above their heads. Startled by the noise, the family head led the elders out of the hall to see what was happening in the skies above. They looked up to find nearly 100 flying vessels filling the air over Shadow City, appearing almost out of nowhere. At that moment, we see a massive flying ship slowly descending, preparing to touch down right in the heart of Yin City. Mounted on the vessel were rows of clearly visible Zhongling turrets, a formidable sight, to say the least. The sheer power of the top forces in the Guanxi Plains was, frankly, a bit terrifying, especially when compared to the Ganyang clan's own modest defenses. The city's defenses seemed utterly insignificant by comparison, as Yin City lacked any anti-aircraft weaponry and had no way to fight back. As the massive vessel, the Feizhou, began its descent, the head of the Ganyang clan let out a hysterical roar, issuing one final command. He told them to flee Yin City while he stayed behind to cover their retreat. He was the family head, after all, and he would not run. He hoped to buy his people a few more precious moments to escape, even as the Feizhou settled slowly and heavily onto the ground. Chun Fan stood on the deck of the Feizhou, watching the panicked members of the Ganyang clan before glancing up at the sky above him. Seeing the other 99 vessels hovering in the air, he grinned, wondering if this grand entrance was impressive enough for the occasion. A full 100 fully equipped ships had cost him a fortune in ghost stones, but he had been smiling ever since he first received the news. It seems he had finally found his target in the Guanxi Plains, and a rather substantial target at that. He had immediately upgraded Fanyu's workshop to level 7 and commissioned 100 ships, pouring his resources into this single, massive deployment. Fanyu's warehouse was down to its last 100 million ghost stones, but he felt the price was worth it to secure the Guanxi Plains. His goal wasn't just to earn more stones. More importantly, it meant his high-speed rail lines could finally reach into the Guanxi region. This would allow Fanyu's influence to expand even further, making future operations much easier, and 100 ships certainly set the right tone. He had already investigated the Hention sect, and 100 ships would be more than enough to handle them. What are you all waiting for? Standing on the deck, Chun Fan looked down at the stunned Ganyang clan members and gave them a friendly wave, beckoning them forward. He told them they were going to give the Hention sect a beating, just as a formal declaration of war began spreading through Fanyu's network. The message traveled across the Guanxi Plains with incredible speed, leaving many people utterly bewildered when they first read the proclamation. Only then did the world realize the Hention sect had wiped out the Ganyang merchant group, but the news of the retaliation was spreading even faster. Before long, the news reached the Tuxian Holy Emperor, who looked at the document in his hands and decided it was time to move. He urged his followers to head to the Hention sect immediately to secure a good spot and witness exactly how Fanyu handled its business. Meanwhile, inside his great hall, the sect master of the Hention sect stared at the declaration in his hands, his expression growing increasingly grim. The declaration addressed to the Hention sect was chilling, stating that even in the brightest light, there are dark corners where treachery hides. It accused them of stabbing Fan Yu in the back and slaughtering the 7 clans of Chi Yu, a core pavilion master, near Jifeng Canyon. This wasn't just a simple robbery, it was a calculated attempt to trample on Fan Yu's foundation and hunt down their people. The message declared this was no longer a private grudge, but a war between civilization and barbarism, a rather dramatic distinction, to be sure. It urged anyone with a shred of humanity to drop their weapons, take off their robes, and leave the sect immediately under the cover of night. Fan Yu promised a path of survival for those who returned, vowing that anyone who left within the hour would be forgiven for their past. The sect master of the Hention sect crumpled the paper into a ball, hissing through gritted teeth that this was an absolute insult. He couldn't believe a power that had suddenly risen in Jiangbei, with no prior history with them, would pick such a massive fight. And all over an insignificant merchant group, no less. The man was so furious that he actually began to laugh at the absurdity. If Fan Yu wanted to play the hero, he would make sure they lost everything, just as a disciple in black hurried into the hall. The disciple presented a letter from the Tuxian Holy Emperor, which arrived alongside a gift of 10,000 ghost stones. After reading it, the sect master was a bit puzzled, as such minor frictions usually wouldn't even be reported to someone of his stature. Yet, he felt quite flattered that a holy emperor would personally write to him and offer ghost stones as a gesture of apology. To him, this was a clear sign of respect for the Hention sect's power, but his moment of pride was interrupted by another subordinate. The messenger reported that the Tuxian Holy Emperor had arrived in person and was waiting on a hillside just 800 meters away. The sect master was stunned for a moment before quickly regaining his composure and marching toward the exit of the Great Hall. He called for his elders to join him in welcoming their guest, while nearby, the Holy Emperor was busy surveying the landscape. Directly ahead of them sat the stronghold of the Hention sect, protected by formidable level 4 city walls. The city stood like a massive mountain stone, firmly anchored in the Guanxi Plains, as the emperor stood atop the slope. He looked out over Hention City, noting that this particular vantage point was perfect for watching the entire spectacle unfold. If something major were to happen, this would be the best vantage point, and the Holy Emperor of Tuxian looked toward the horizon with a sense of anticipation. We can imagine Fan Yu might be rushing this way on a high-speed train right now. Just then, the gates of Hention City suddenly swung open. A large group of people marched out in a grand procession, with the sect master of the Hention sect leading the way at the very front. Flanked by his elders and a crowd of disciples, he strode confidently until he stood directly before the Holy Emperor of Tuxian. He glanced at the group behind the emperor and laughed heartily, calling out to Ziwei that it had been quite a long time since they last met. He remarked that everyone in the Guanxi Plains knows the Holy Emperor has a heart for the world, and today, he finally saw it for himself. He noted that when Fan Yu of Jiangbei ignorantly challenged them, Ziwei was the first to send word, a gesture he found quite touching. The sect master claimed he accepted the kindness, but insisted it wasn't necessary, just as the Holy Emperor snapped out of his daydreaming. Suddenly hearing that bright laughter in his ear, the Holy Emperor, Yang Lu, frowned and asked what on earth he was talking about. He insisted they were brothers, and he couldn't just stand by, urging his brother to go back inside before he caught a cold in the chill. The sect master was about to speak, but instinctively looked up at the sun. It was early March, the start of spring, and not cold at all. Confused, he tried to explain himself, but the Holy Emperor cut him off with a dead serious expression, telling him to head back immediately. He declared he would stand guard right there and told the sect master not to make things difficult, or he'd feel guilty if his friend fell ill. The sect master was left utterly dazed by this intensity, and feeling half-pushed, he began to lead his people back toward Hention City. To be honest, Ziwei's strange behavior had completely stunned him. He had prepared a whole speech to deliver, but now it was forgotten. After just a few sentences from the emperor, the poor man had entirely lost his train of thought. News quickly spread that the Tuxian Holy Emperor was personally stationed just outside the Hention sect, causing quite a stir. Anyone with eyes could see what was happening. He was either there to watch the show or to provide backup, and neither boded well for Fan Yu. This meant that in 1 hour, Fan Yu would surely make their move, and nearby powers immediately began mobilizing toward the Hention sect. Gradually, more and more factions gathered around Hention City, all waiting to see how this dramatic confrontation would finally play out. However, the hillside that offered the absolute best vantage point remained firmly occupied by the Holy Emperor of Tuxian. Meanwhile, the sect master of Hention received each guest with a constant, beaming smile, clearly surprised by his sect's reputation. He marveled that so many had come to help in their time of need. Meanwhile, Fan Yu's fleet of 100 flying ships soared through the heavens. They were racing toward the Hention sect at an incredible speed. On board, the head of the Gonyang clan approached the master. He walked up to Chun Fan with a face full of guilt, his voice a mix of deep gratitude and lingering fear. He asked if this journey would cost Fan Yu a great fortune. Chun Fan looked up at the old man and replied quite casually, He told him to estimate it himself, asking if it looked expensive. The clan head froze, realizing no estimation was even necessary. Anyone could guess the cost just by looking at this display. Master, he said, the Gonyang clan will now officially merge into Fanyu. He promised they would work like slaves for Fanyu, but Chun Fan gave the old man a truly strange look, noting his imagination was quite vivid. He reminded him that Fanyu's recruitment was very strict, so he should stop trying to force a deal and just relax. Back at Hention City, more and more factions were arriving, creating a lively crowd outside the sect. Suddenly, a startled cry rang out from the masses. The Holy Emperor of Tusien followed the direction of the noise, looking toward the horizon along with the noisy crowd. Once he saw it clearly, even a man who had seen as many grand spectacles as he had couldn't help but freeze in his tracks. At first, it was merely a ripple of iron gray deep within the clouds, but as that ripple drew closer, the truth became clear. We see that it was actually nearly 100 flying ships, each one resembling a massive iron fish magnified many times over. The sheer shock of them breaking through the sky was terrifying, especially in the Guanxi Plains where skeletal horses were the norm. Most people here were seeing ships fly through the air for the very first time. As the fleet approached Hention City, the gathered factions turned pale with fear and stood rooted to the spot. It was the flag of Jiangbei Fanyu. They had actually arrived. In the blink of an eye, the chain of flying ships was hovering directly over the Hention sect. Then, a massive mechanical sound, composed of countless metallic clicks, echoed from the sky as the plates on the surface of every ship suddenly slid open. The panels retracted to reveal rows of dark, hollow muzzles, the barrels of the god-slaying cannons. The surrounding structures collapsed almost instantly as bursts of crimson starlight began to saturate the area. The overflow of damage automatically locked onto every living soul it could find. Then, 1,700 max-level cannons fired all at once, making the ground tremble violently as the entire sky suddenly turned dark. It wasn't that eternal night had fallen, but rather that the brilliance of the cannons had completely eclipsed the sun. Every onlooker witnessed the most shocking sight of their lives, countless crimson shells falling in a relentless, unbroken stream. They rained straight down upon the Hention region in such density that people dozens of miles away could see them clearly. The Holy Emperor of Tusien watched this scene unfold, his body frozen in place and his lips beginning to tremble. He had always been arrogant, believing his sect feared no one, but in this moment, he felt true terror. The torrent of crimson shells pouring from the cannons wove a three-dimensional web of death in the air, covering every inch of space. There was no blood and no screaming, yet the thick aura of death was unmistakable. After the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, the crimson flow finally faded and the earth stopped shaking. Light slowly returned to their vision as our witnesses began to readjust to the natural glow of the sun. Hention City was simply gone. Where a fortress once stood, there was now only a bottomless, gaping crater. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they never would have believed it. Only moments ago, the time it takes to finish a cup of tea, a city stood where this massive pit now lies. In the span of a single tea break, everything had been leveled. Just then, the fleet hovering high above began to move. The flagship at the very center of the formation slowly descended, landing right in front of the stunned crowd. Chun Fan stepped off the ship accompanied by his entourage, his gaze sweeping across the faces of everyone present. With a gentle smile, he introduced himself as Chun Fan of Jiangbei Fanyu, telling them he was pleased to meet them. The various factions who had come only to watch the spectacle were still far too stunned to offer any response. They desperately wanted to say something, but their lips trembled with such nervous tension that speaking a single complete sentence seemed almost impossible. After all, the people of the Guanxi Plains were used to seeing skeletal horses, not a fleet like this. This was on an entirely different level. The Holy Emperor of Tusien, forcing himself to regain some semblance of composure, stepped forward with a smile that looked more painful than crying, asking why Chun Fan hadn't sent word so he could prepare a proper welcome. He claimed his sect was the first to welcome Fanyu's move south, while Chun Fan simply looked at him with a faint, knowing smile. It was a strange situation. Even before Fanyu had shown its full strength, Chun Fan had already received numerous apology letters and reports from this man. It made him feel almost awkward about starting a war with the Tusien sect. Normally, the Tusien sect would have claimed this territory, but Chun Fan said nothing more, simply glancing at the crowd before returning to his flagship. The massive vessel slowly ascended, joining the rest of the fleet as they gathered in the sky. They accelerated toward the horizon, and within moments, the entire fleet had vanished from everyone's sight. It was as if nothing had happened at all, if one ignored the massive, gaping hole in the ground. Soon, the surrounding factions began to disperse. That night in the Guanxi Plains, countless people found themselves tossing and turning, unable to sleep after what they had witnessed. They had spent their lives fighting over resources to grow their families, but after seeing the power displayed today, they suddenly felt a sense of resignation. Why fight when you can never beat Fanyu? Better to just live a quiet, honest life. However, in the dead of night, 100 ships returned under the cover of darkness, flying back into the Guanxi Plains. They landed directly beside the deep crater where Hention City once stood, their ghostly lights spilling out over the pit. A large group of combat division members, carrying shovels and various tools, marched down from the ships. They immediately began the busy work of excavating. Even a little meat is still meat, as the saying goes. The primary goal during the day was to make an example of the city and establish Fanyu's reputation. That mission was accomplished, but sending a crew to scavenge the ruins in broad daylight would have been a bit embarrassing, so Chun Fan decided to wait for nightfall. The local factions were surprisingly sensible. Not a single soul had dared to touch the treasures left in Hention City's ruins. Chun Fan had actually planned to pay a visit to anyone who looted them, but this was better. He stood on the deck, watching his people work. With the Fanyu members busy in the pit, we can assume the various powers of the Guanxi Plains will be much quieter for a while. This peace allowed him to begin laying down high-speed rail lines and signal towers. Once these were in place, it would mean this entire region was officially his territory. However, Chun Fan stood on the wall in silence, looking rather troubled. Under normal circumstances, the expansion of the signal towers and rail network should have begun 7 days ago. But there was a problem. Laying the tracks required Wei Wei's assistance. It had been quite some time since he'd seen Wei Wei, and he actually missed him. Unfortunately, Wei Wei's identity token had been left behind in the city, leaving them with no way to track his whereabouts. Where Wei Wei had gone was anyone's guess. He was certainly on this continent, but considering its vast size, that wasn't saying much. Wang Matzi had been exploring for ages and still hadn't finished. Finding one vicious fish in this wilderness was easier said than done. Standing nearby, Keiho looked on with eyes full of guilt and panic, whispering an apology for the situation. Chun Fan shook his head, his brow furrowed. He knew Keiho was already overwhelmed managing all the mining operations on the new continent. He looked toward the distant thunderstorms over the ocean. Perhaps that violent weather had somehow lured Wei Wei away. It was a strange thought. Wei Wei usually only cared about eating. What could possibly be so attractive to him? It must have been something incredible to make him leave his favorite token behind and abandon the new continent's first stronghold. Could it be? Chun Fan stood in silence as a single possibility crossed his mind. Just then, a sound broke his concentration. The transmission talisman in Keiho's robe suddenly rang. It was a message. Wang Matzi was returning and would arrive in about 2 hours. He was reportedly bringing back a major discovery. Chun Fan gave a somewhat frustrated grunt in response, his mind elsewhere. 2 hours later, Wang Matzi stood before Chun Fan, ready to report on his significant findings from the new continent. But suddenly, they noticed something on the distant horizon. Numerous ships and flying vessels were scouting along the edge of the storm. His expression shifted instantly as the realization hit him. Master, is it possible the thunderstorm region is showing signs of collapse? Chun Fan let out a soft sigh. Wei Wei is missing. After ruling out every other possibility, I suspect there is something in those storms. He feared an illusion of Wei Wei's parents had lured him into the sea. Wang Matzi stood frozen in place for a long moment after hearing this. He looked blankly at the distant fleet of airships and sea vessels, then back at his master and Keiho standing beside him. Looking utterly bewildered, he asked, Master, what are you saying? Didn't you send Wei Wei to that deep pit to dig for earth marrow? He claimed that on his way back, he saw Wei Wei in that very pit, digging away. He even waved, and she had waved her paws back. What? The word hung in the air, thick with sudden tension. Chi Yu's voice soon crackled through the transmission talisman, confirming she had been busy mining and hadn't seen Wei Wei at all. Chun Fan suddenly began to laugh, though a cold light flashed in his eyes. It seemed someone in Fanyu was now bold enough to give orders in his name. He turned immediately toward the airship. Let's go find Wei Wei. I'm quite curious to see who issued that command. Keiho and Wang Matzi exchanged a look, both seeing the growing unease in each other's eyes as they hurried to follow him. From the first stronghold of the new continent to the pit Wang Matzi discovered was a journey that should have taken 3 full days. But Chun Fan pushed through day and night, arriving before dark on the second day. There, we see a lone figure at the bottom of the pit. It was Wei Wei, working tirelessly and entirely alone. Seeing this, a flash of genuine fury crossed Chun Fan's face. With no airship and no high-speed rail, Wei Wei had traveled all this way alone to dig for earth marrow. To be honest, it was a heartbreaking sight. Only Wei Wei knew the true depth of that loneliness. Whether this was a cruel joke or a test of authority, Chun Fan wouldn't let it slide. This matter was far from over. As the airship slowly descended, Wei Wei heard the noise and looked up from her work. She froze for a moment upon seeing Chun Fan, but when her gaze landed on Wang Matzi, her lantern-sized eyes flared with sudden anger. She began to roar, a sound that made it clear she had been bullied and was now venting her grievances to her master. Keiho silently shuffled a few steps away, trying his best to put as much distance as possible between himself and the unfortunate Wang Matzi. A sudden thought crossed their minds. Could Wang Matzi have overstepped his authority and given Wei Wei a private order just to claim credit? It seemed Wei Wei had actually followed his lead, and in an instant, Wang Matzi's face turned deathly pale with realization. He felt utterly framed. After all, they had shared a friendly greeting when he passed by earlier, so why was she roaring at him now? It truly had nothing to do with him. Ignoring Wang Mozi's panicked expression, Chun Fan leaned on his staff and walked down into the pit alone. He stood beside Wei Wei, engaging in a long conversation through a mix of gestures and looks, before eventually leading her back up. Wei Wei followed behind him, looking completely aggrieved, though Keiho noticed the anger in Chun Fan's eyes had been replaced by a weary helplessness. Realizing the situation might not be as dire as feared, Keiho tentatively asked which high-ranking official had actually issued the order. A pavilion master, Chun Fan replied. When asked which one, he sighed and answered, the master of the Beast Pavilion. At that point, he couldn't help himself. He reached out and gave Wei Wei's head a light, frustrated knock while scolding her. He asked her how she could possibly give herself an order, especially considering the massive amount of resources spent trying to find her. So many members of Fanyu had risked being swallowed by the thunderstorm region just to search the seas for her safety. And yet, here she was, having assigned herself the mission of digging for earth marrow after traveling such a massive distance on her own. Standing to the side, Wang Mozi let out a long sigh of relief. It was clear he was off the hook, though he was still quite confused. When he asked what had happened, Chun Fan sighed again, explaining that it was a long story involving a misunderstanding back at Fanyu. He had been sitting on the city wall contemplating their future development while Wei Wei rested at his feet, and he had made a casual remark. He had mentioned that his birthday was approaching, and Wei Wei had taken those words to heart, determined to find him a proper gift. She decided he would love the earth marrow from this region, so she planned to surprise him with a massive haul and went to see Zhao Sheng. After bypassing the guards and leaving her identification token behind, she spent days running all the way from the first stronghold. She had come all this way just to start mining. If Wang Mozi hadn't stumbled upon her, there's no telling how long the search would have lasted. Chun Fan admitted the silly creature had given him a massive headache, while Wang Mozi watched as Wei Wei continued to bare her teeth at him. So, as it turns out, when she waved her white paw at him earlier, she wasn't saying hello, she was telling him to keep her secret. In her eyes, he was now nothing more than an untrustworthy snitch, leaving Wang Mozi standing there looking more bewildered than ever. After all, who on earth could have guessed that a paw gesture meant keep this a secret? Not that he understood any of it anyway. Chun Fan told her they were going back to Jiangbei to build the high-speed rail, but then he felt a sudden weight drop into his palm. He looked down to see Wei Wei timidly spitting a piece of earth marrow into his hand. He stopped mid-sentence, paused, and then finally laughed. He decided to let it go, noting that regardless of the trouble, this was indeed the very first birthday gift he had ever received from her. Wei Wei grew excited at his praise, her tail thumping against the deck as it always did, and we see Chun Fan's mood finally begin to lift. Even so, he sternly warned Wei Wei that in the future, she was never to leave her identity token behind or act on her own again. 3 days later, our group returned to the New World's first stronghold, ready to put this little adventure behind them. As Wang Mozi watched Chun Fan and Wei Wei walk toward the Fanyu high-speed rail platform, he couldn't help but feel a bit sentimental. It was no short distance from here to that deep pit, and it was clear that Wei Wei had truly put her heart into the journey. But then, he slapped his forehead as a sudden realization hit him. He had completely forgotten that he was actually there to report a discovery. With all the distractions, the main news had slipped his mind, prompting Keiho to ask if it was actually anything important. Keiho offered to pass the message to the young master, or suggested Wang Mozi take the train to report it in person if it was urgent. Wang Mozi scratched his head, explaining that because the heavenly Tao of the New World had died, he noticed something concerning. The entire continent was slowly fracturing, and he estimated it wouldn't be long before the land completely broke apart into pieces. Keiho stared at him blankly for a moment before immediately pulling a red transmission talisman from his robes without a second thought. This was Fanyu's highest-grade talisman, used only for the most dire emergencies, which sent Wang Mozi into a sudden panic. He tried to calm Keiho down, explaining that the collapse would take 70 or 80 years, plenty of time to finish their mining. Keiho told him to stay calm, but noted that the news was terrifying. Wang Mozi sheepishly admitted that perhaps it did sound a bit alarming. Chun Fan sat comfortably inside the Fanyu high-speed rail car as it sped through the undersea tunnel, the rhythmic hum of the tracks filling the air. Occasionally, the roar of another train passing from the opposite direction echoed by, and he turned to see Wei Wei with her paws resting against the glass. He smiled at her before leaning back to rest his eyes, feeling that this chapter was finally closing, though a new message was already arriving. Based on Wang Mozi's recent observations of the fissures across the New World, he had detected that the entire continent would likely collapse in 70 or 80 years. The land would shatter completely unless a new heavenly Tao was installed during that time, which might be the only way to prevent total destruction. Chun Fan laughed at the thought. A heavenly Tao isn't exactly a toy you can just replace on a whim. Where would one even find such a thing? And yet, he looked thoughtfully deep into his soul at the Eternal Night Spirit Lord panel, specifically at the Sovereign of the Realm section. It stated that his ghost fires would draw energy from the darkness without needing a master's maintenance, provided he was on a continent he controlled. If he lit ghost fires in every single region, he would receive the special Sovereign of the Realm reward, and the description was quite clear. It didn't just apply to the Eternal Night continent. The New World counted too. He had actually considered this possibility before. His plan was to fill the New World with ghost fires and claim that reward once Wang Matzi finished exploring the majority of the territory. By blanketing the land in 6th grade ghost fire, he could secure the Sovereign of the Realm bonus. Sovereign of the Realm, he mused quietly. After muttering the phrase to himself, he returned to Fanhua. A moment later, we see Chun Fan standing atop the walls of cave number 1. His gaze swept across the canyon toward the nameless mountains, looking at the faint silhouette of the Jiangbei defense line guarding the coast. The 170-kilometer Jiangbei defense line was now complete, but in reality, it was little more than an empty shell. It was just a wall without any turrets or logistical defense structures. To be honest, a wall that cannot fight back is hardly a defense at all. Sooner or later, the ghost nests would wear it down, meaning he needed to gather more ghost stones to fully arm the entire line. There were only 2.5 years left before the undersea ghost nests made landfall, which meant surviving 2 more rainy seasons first. Eventually, the endless hordes would land at Jiangbei. After hearing Wang Kuei's report, Chun Fan set out with Wei Wei and 2 Fanyu members. They began their journey toward the city. For the foreseeable future, Fanyu's mission was to build high-speed rails and signal towers across the Guanxi Plains. Chun Fan was preparing to leave Fanyu for a while, but before departing, he turned his attention to the camp's core structure, the ghost fire. He used a heavenly Dao stone on it, and a moment later, a panel flickered into existence, confirming the stone had been successfully applied. 3 heavenly Dao blessings appeared, giving him 100 breaths to choose one. The first option was a blessing called Steady Stream. This would allow the ghost fire to absorb energy from the eternal night, condensing 1,000 ghost stones every single day. However, this effect was limited to only 1 ghost fire. The second option was a blessing titled One More Time. If a building upgrade within the camp triggered a qualitative change, he would be granted a single chance to re-roll the outcome. The re-roll wouldn't change the quality of the upgrade, but it would randomly swap the specific direction of that qualitative change. The third option was Universal Spirit of 10,000 Nations, which affected every ghost fire built and placed within the camp's territory. With this, every upgrade would no longer require rare treasures, needing only ghost stones to progress. Chun Fan stared at the panel, and after a long moment of stunned silence, he suddenly grinned. Without a hint of hesitation, he chose the third option. This Universal Spirit blessing was exactly what he needed, as it allowed him to create actual ghost fires without wasting precious materials. Since it only required ghost stones, the path forward was clear. Once Wang Matzi finished scouting the continent and produced a complete ghost skin map of the New World, he could begin his grand work of dotting the entire land with ghost fires to claim that special reward. It was a perfect setup, and Chun Fan couldn't help but laugh at his good fortune. This is quite good, he thought to himself. With that settled, the 9-5 Dragon Year train roared out of the port once again, its powerful engine echoing across the Jiangbei wilderness. It sped directly toward the south. Time flew by, and for the next month and a half, Fanyu's expansion continued at a breakneck pace. Chun Fan didn't return to Fanyu even once during this time, staying out on the Guanxi Plains to personally oversee the rail lines and signal towers. Eventually, we see Chun Fan stepping off the 9-5 Dragon Year, looking exhausted as he rubbed his aching shoulders. The workload had been so intense he could barely catch his breath, but in just a few days, the Guanxi high-speed rail would officially open. And now, his journey had finally brought him to the main pass of the Guanxi region, where the next phase of his plan awaited. According to news from Xiaoqiu, the situation at the Eternal Night Shop was becoming desperate, and they could no longer support Defense Line 7. If the line were to fall again, the entire region might be lost for good. So Chun Fan had developed a backup plan. He intended to cover the Guangdong Plains with high-speed rail and signal towers, just in case the worst should happen. This way, he would know immediately, rather than sitting in Jiangbei completely unaware while the Guangdong Plains were being overrun. He climbed back into the carriage, and with a crack of the whip from the Fanyu driver, the 9-5 Dragon Year surged forward. Before the eyes of the onlookers, it crossed the ruins and headed straight into the heart of the Guangdong Plains without stopping. He told himself he would finish the work first and rest back at Fanyu later, as the train continued its deep trek south. The work of laying tracks and installing towers continued relentlessly until, as the calendar turned to early July. Under a sweltering sun, Chun Fan finally laid eyes on Defense Line 7 and stepped down from his carriage. With a solemn expression, he gazed at the massive fortification that seemed to stretch forever, connecting the earth to the very sky. The walls here were all level 6. If such a defense stood in Jiangbei, the region would be absolutely untouchable. This only proved that the pressure on the Guangdong Plains was far greater than in Jiangbei, considering the scale of the threat. Any ghost nest capable of breaking such a line was terrifying to imagine, and he realized his time was running dangerously short. He had to grow his power as quickly as possible. Lord of Fanyu, Xiaoqiu said, suddenly appearing by his side. Looking at Chun Fan with visible excitement, he offered to find the commander of Defense Line 7 to arrange a proper reception. Chen Fan, standing by the 9-5 Dragon Year, noted that he hadn't even revealed his true identity to them yet. Gazing at the distant wall, he could see shadows of many people moving back and forth beneath the massive structure. He hadn't seen this many people during his entire journey. He shook his head, telling Xiaoqiu there was no need for introductions. "Just come with me," he said. Xiaoqiu hesitated, glancing back at the Great Wall, but ultimately gave a respectful nod. He quickly contacted the other members of the Hidden Pavilion, though he hadn't yet said goodbye to the many friends he'd made. He told himself there would be other chances to meet again, and Chen Fan turned back to the 9-5 Dragon Year to prepare for the return journey. We see that he understood the importance of Defense Line 7, but he had no desire to contact its leaders just yet. It wasn't the right time. Deep down, he knew his current strength was insufficient. Getting too close now would likely result in the Eternal Night Shop using him as a shield. He was perfectly willing to guard Jiangbei, support the Guangdong Plains, or even contribute his strength to the entire Eternal Night Continent. But being a sacrificial pawn was out of the question. Once the members of the Hidden Pavilion had gathered, the group prepared to depart. The 9-5 Dragon Year began its rapid journey back toward the Guanxi Plains. He had been away from home for far too long, after all. By early July of the year 380 in the Eternal Night calendar, the tracks of the Fanyu high-speed rail had been successfully laid across the Guanxi Plains. With every corner of the Guangdong Plains now connected, Fanyu's influence expanded once more. Meanwhile, back at Defense Line 7, the recruitment officer, whose lower body had been severed, sat at a dining table staring at the 2 meals placed before him. He didn't move a muscle, remaining silent for a long time as the people around him gradually began to disperse. The mealtime had already passed and Xiaoqiu was still nowhere to be seen, so the man finally picked up his chopsticks and began to eat slowly. Usually, that fellow would join him for a meal before nightfall, but today, he simply hadn't shown up. Furthermore, he had just learned that the entire group that arrived with Xiaoqiu had also vanished without a trace. With the coming season of travel approaching, the mounting pressure felt like a heavy weight on everyone's chest, making it hard to breathe. It was quite normal for people to flee every day, especially since that guy wasn't even from Guangdong. His departure was only to be expected. And yet, for some reason, the food didn't taste as good as it usually did. "Hey, Uncle Lu," a voice suddenly called out. A young man approached the table and, without any hesitation, picked up the unclaimed meal and began stuffing it into his mouth. "Since that guy ran off, I'll take this," he said. "I'm still hungry, so an extra portion is exactly what I need." The middle-aged man, Uncle Lu, said nothing. He simply lowered his head and continued eating his own food in silence. "Uncle Lu, have you noticed something strange?" the youth asked. "About all the disabled people on Line 7 who were infected by ghosts. They only ever have the upper half of their bodies. I don't think I've ever seen one with just the lower half. Isn't that strange?" The young man looked at Uncle Lu with a serious expression, his mouth full of food as he spoke, causing the middle-aged man to finally react. He looked up and stared at the youth with a completely expressionless face. "Do you think you're being funny?" he asked coldly. The young man awkwardly set down his chopsticks. "I just saw that you seemed a bit sad, Uncle Lu," he muttered defensively. "I was just trying to cheer you up. Besides, I'm not going anywhere." The middle-aged man said nothing more, his gaze drifting toward the darkness, rapidly swallowing the world beyond the ghost fire's glow. After a long silence, he whispered to himself, "Honestly, if you're going to leave, at least say goodbye so I can give you some travel money." The faint roars of countless ghosts began to echo in the air. Outside Defense Line 7, the ghost nests were launching another assault. "A new night of fighting has begun. I'm heading out. I'm responsible for the Ghost Corps replenishment of 10 turrets in Section 7 today." As the eternal night descended, the youth across from him quickly shoveled the last 2 bites of rice into his mouth. He ran off into the distance, his voice muffled as he disappeared into the crowd. A single person like him, we might think, is almost entirely dispensable to the defense of Line 7. And yet, the Great Wall guarding the Guangdong Plains is built precisely from countless dispensable people, making it an incredibly solid and unyielding force, which, in its own way, is quite remarkable. By early July of the year 380 in the Eternal Night calendar, amidst the sweltering summer heat, Shun Fan finally returned to Fanyu. Lying on his bed in the wooden house of Cave 1, he turned his head to look at the calendar on the wall. Once this rainy season passed, there would be exactly 2 years left before the undersea ghost tide made landfall. After months of relentless work, all the high-speed rail tracks were finally laid. These days, the presence of the Fanyu rail system was fundamentally changing the Guanxi Plains. The entire power structure of the region was shifting. Most notably, the constant state of warfare that had plagued the local factions for a century was finally being broken. While sales of skeleton horses plummeted, the Guanxi Plains as a whole gradually became more peaceful. After stretching his stiff limbs, Chun Fan made his way toward the Jiangbei defense line. We find Chun Fan standing atop the Jiangbei defense line, his gaze sweeping across the vast sea as waves crash relentlessly against the jagged rocks. Over the past few months, Fanyu had managed to stockpile a significant amount of ghost stones, finally allowing him to complete the fortifications here. He eventually made his way to the very end of the line, where he spotted a familiar skeleton horse before beginning his work. From one end to the other, he began constructing the defensive structures. Shikigami cannons, copper pipes, and anti-aircraft batteries began to take shape. One by one, the buildings rose with incredible speed until darkness fell, forcing Chun Fan to finally pause his tireless construction efforts. He estimated it would take several more days to finish. After that, he descended from the wall and returned to his wooden house on Nameless Mountain. He collapsed onto his bed, utterly exhausted this time, telling himself that he deserved at least one day of rest before continuing. Soon, the sound of light snoring filled the room. Chun Fan fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, one so profound he even had a rare dream. In this vision, he saw the Jiangbei defense line 2 years into the future, completely demolished by a ghost nest surging from the ocean floor. Countless lives were lost as Jiangbei fell, with Fanyu being the first to be wiped out. Just before the end, he saw a desperate act of self-preservation. A cold, brilliant light exploded within the ghost nest, clearing a massive area of the spectral mist, but the void didn't stay empty for long. The gap was immediately swallowed by an endless tide of ghosts. He watched, powerless and unwilling to accept defeat, knowing he had no cards left to play. Just as the swarm was about to consume him, a sudden chill caused Chun Fan to shiver and snap awake from the nightmare. He stepped outside onto the wall of Cave 1, watching the darkness recede as the morning sun hung high in the sky. It seems he had slept straight through until mid-morning. Dreams and reality are opposites, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the lingering dread. To be honest, that dream was a terrible omen. As the 4-year deadline drew closer, even someone as composed as him was starting to feel the tension. Based on his experiences in the ancient battlefield, the level 5 walls he was building should, theoretically, be enough to hold the line. That is, assuming his ghost stone ammunition didn't run dry. But no one truly knew if these ghost nests had grown stronger over the centuries. After all, even Defense Line 7, with its superior level 6 walls, had been breached during the rainy season and nearly fell into total ruin. He decided he needed to be even better prepared. A moment later, while back at his construction work, he summoned Xiaoqiu to his side. He wanted to know more about Defense Line 7. Xiaoqiu arrived quickly at Chun Fan's side, asking what the Jade Lord needed. Chun Fan nodded slightly, continuing his construction while speaking casually, noting that Xiaoqiu had spent half a year at that very line. He asked for every detail Xiaoqiu knew. With a serious expression, Xiaoqiu pulled a small notebook from his robes to begin his report. After a quick glance at his notes, he explained that Defense Line 7 wasn't actually on the front lines of the Evernight continent. Instead, it served as a secondary defense in the rear, meaning the ghost nests it faced weren't quite as massive as those at the front. Even so, it was the largest nest Xiaoqiu had ever seen. Even outside the rainy season, the ghosts seemed to cover the earth and sky. Tens of millions of spectral creatures would emerge from the sea after nightfall, launching relentless attacks against the defensive line. They fought without fear of death. The line stretched 97 kilometers, and we learned that its most common defense was a specific turret, known as the Sword Feather Turret. This green-grade structure could be fully upgraded without needing any rare or exotic treasures. A single one cost 100,000 ghost stones to build. There were also hidden towers, yellow-grade structures used for city defense. Placed every kilometer, these were designed to target the great ghosts within the nests, possessing immense single-target destructive power. Naturally, their energy consumption was equally massive. The rest of the defenses included anti-aircraft guns and a vast, open killing field. In that space, they grew massive amounts of ghost iron, a specialized plant that triggers a violent explosion upon contact once it matures. It takes a full year to grow and cannot be moved, eventually poking its head above the soil. Once the rainy season ends, the soldiers of Line 7 begin large-scale sowing of these ghost iron seeds outside the walls, time for the following year's rains. They mature just in time to greet the first major wave of the ghost nests. Chun Fan nodded, processing this clever, if volatile, strategy. After a long pause, he shifted the topic, asking how much Xiaoqiu knew about the Evernight Palace. Xiaoqiu took a moment to think. He explained that this organization was the largest entity on the continent, though it wasn't a traditional power structure or sect. Any group willing to help the continent could join. There was no salary or material reward, yet members were expected to contribute. They were dedicated solely to the protection of the Evernight continent. It wasn't so much an organization as it was the continent's soul. All these powers joined forces to protect the Evernight continent together, with those who have ghost stones providing them, and those with manpower providing soldiers. The organization doesn't even have its own architects. They simply request ghost stones from the factions that haven't officially joined the Evernight Palace yet. We learned that even the general manager of Defense Line 7 has never actually met the master of the palace or visited the continent's heartland. He is a native of Guangdong and was once a faction leader himself, taking over after his previous organization fell and the former commander perished. Appointed in a moment of absolute crisis, he became the general manager, responsible for the entire strategic coordination of Defense Line 7. Before the last rainy season, because the accumulated ghost stones weren't enough, Line 7 sent a formal request to the Evernight Palace for support. They were desperately seeking reinforcements to bolster their dwindling supplies. The ghost tribes caught wind of this and, at any cost, forced a breakthrough at a secondary line just as the shipment of stones was passing through. While crossing the Choming Basin, the shipment was intercepted and the transport vessel was sunk. The Evernight Palace eventually sent word of this disaster. He informed the Room 7 line that there were no more ghost stones to spare for their support, leaving them to hope that Room 7 could hold out on its own. Chen Fan suddenly stopped his forging. Below him, the massive city walls that had been slowly shifting into place came to a complete standstill. He frowned and turned his gaze toward Xiaoqiu, asking about the mention of a traitor. To be honest, the concept didn't quite make sense to him. If two human factions were at war, a traitor would be expected, but in a war between humans and ghosts, how could a traitor even exist? He wondered if a human would truly choose to defect to the side of the ghosts. Xiaoqiu nodded, confirming his darkest suspicions. A major reason the front lines are in such critical danger is that during this particular descent of Evernight, things have changed. Many ghosts have awakened a level of intelligence, learning to use clever tactics that make them incredibly difficult to deal with. It's a grim development. Almost everyone, including those in the Evernight Palace, knows the continent likely won't survive this time, yet they are still giving everything to stop it. Even if they can't win, they refuse to let the ghost nests reach the shore easily. After all, as long as they persist, a miracle might happen. It turns out that some ghosts use various methods to infiltrate the Evernight Palace, seeking out those whose resolve might be wavering. They offer promises to any humans willing to defect now, claiming they will be spared once the ghost tribes have completely conquered the continent. They even promise to set aside a specific region for these defectors to live in. As it turns out, there are more than a few traitors within the Evernight Palace. We learn that both the ghost tribes and the Evernight Palace are fully aware of the massive gap currently left in the Jiangbei defense line. The ghosts are constantly probing for news on when the palace will finally move to secure Jiangbei, clearly planning to repeat their old, successful tactics. Their goal is to have the ghost nests land at Jiangbei, march south into the Guanxi Plains, and then strike from both the inside and the outside. By pulling down Defense Line 7, they could sweep east into the heart of the continent. Hearing this, Chen Fan remained silent for a long time. He knew the front lines were in trouble, but he hadn't realized the situation was quite this dire. For now, the main front seems to be holding. However, the Jiangbei and 7 lines have become the critical pivot points. If these two fall, the entire Evernight continent, this massive entity, could very well collapse in an instant. This explains why Line 7 nearly fell during the rainy season. To be honest, it was a miracle it didn't. The primary reason was the lack of ghost stones. Yes, Xiaoqiu lets out a long, heavy sigh as he finishes his report, the weight of it hanging in the air. He stands behind Chen Fan in total silence. He tried his best to keep his report objective, stripping away any personal emotion from the facts. Deep down, however, he utterly loathes those traitors. If it weren't for them, the continent, and Line 7, wouldn't be facing such an impossible struggle. Chen Fan resumes his work, forging one building after another, yet he remains wrapped in a heavy, thoughtful silence that lasts for a long while. Master and servant stand together, neither speaking a word. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Chen Fan speaks in a quiet, steady voice. He decides to send aid to Defense Line 7, with Xiaoqiu delivering it personally. But there is a catch. They must not know it comes from Jiangbei Fanyu. He instructs Xiaoqiu to present the aid as coming from an anonymous power. If possible, he wants Line 7 to keep this entire matter quiet. He even asks that they don't report it to the Evernight Palace. Xiaoqiu is momentarily stunned, but he quickly recovers and gives a firm nod of agreement. He knows that Fanyu's own situation is incredibly difficult, with the undersea ghost tide in Jiangbei about to make landfall at any moment. Fanyu hasn't received a single ghost stone in aid from the Evernight Palace. Chen Fan mutters to himself that the line is 97 kilometers long. If he places a soul-testing sculpture every 100 meters, he will need 970 of them. That is a staggering amount of resources. It will require roughly 2.5 million ghost stones. And so, before the rainy season begins, Fanyu prepares its first shipment of aid for Line 7. That means 970 soul-testing sculptures. We see that each one of these sculptures has a remarkable capability. They can reduce the ammunition consumption of all nearby turrets by 40%, which would be an immense help to Defense Line 7. He can't spare many ghost stones. He barely has enough for himself, but he simply cannot stand by and watch Line 7 fall. In addition to the sculptures, he plans to support Line 7 with a batch of copper pipes, altars, and soul-testing cannons. This would significantly boost the defensive walls and firepower of Line 7. However, there is a catch regarding the copper pipes. They can't be transported via the high-speed rail. He would need to go to Line 7 and forge them personally, which he is still considering. Until he has enough strength to protect himself, he is reluctant to have deep dealings with the Evernight Palace. After all, a traitor might be watching. He worries someone might leak his information to the ghost tribes. Unless, of course, he remains anonymous, which might just be the solution. While he can't hide forever, every moment of secrecy buys Fanyu a little more precious time to grow and develop. Fanyu is desperately short on time right now. If only the war could be paused for a moment. A long while later, Chen Fan stops his forging work and looks over at Xiaoqiu. He notes that Xiaoqiu seemed hesitant when told to leave earlier. Xiaoqiu looks away, a bit embarrassed, admitting he made a few friends at line 7. Chen Fan pauses for a moment before responding. Gazing out at the distant sea, he says quietly that he will forge a batch of soul-testing sculptures today for Xiaoqiu to lead the delivery. They will be shipped to line 7 via the high-speed rail tomorrow. Xiaoqiu nods vigorously, unable to hide his excitement. After Xiaoqiu leaves, Chen Fan stands at the edge of the deck and takes a long, comfortable stretch. To be honest, he deserves the break. He puts the Jiangbei defense plan on hold for the day to focus on forging 1,000 sculptures to send to line 7. As for himself, he must first survive the ghost nest arrival in 2.5 years. He looks out at the turbulent, crashing waves. He has never personally seen an undersea ghost nest make landfall, and he wonders if they can truly hold the line. On the following day, Xiaoqiu leads his team onto the high-speed train, heading toward the Guangdong Plains. As night begins to fall, the usually quiet defense line 7 begins to bustle with activity. Ever night is coming, and they must prepare for what follows. Meanwhile, the recruitment officer who lost his legs is going about his usual routine, hobbling on crutches to get his meal. This time, Uncle Lu only prepares a single portion. As he sits down, he looks at the empty seat across from him. Subconsciously, he finds himself looking back, almost expecting to see Xiaoqiu standing there, grinning and greeting him as always. But the crowd flows past, and Xiaoqiu is nowhere to be found. Realizing his mistake, he can only shake his head and smile. He begins to eat, mocking his own sentimentality. He is much older than Xiaoqiu, but in a place like this, age gaps don't matter. When he looks at Xiaoqiu, he sees his younger self, fearless, brave, and confident, a mirror of his own youth. Yet the boy is smarter. If Lu had been quicker to run back then, he wouldn't have lost his legs. Suddenly, the air changes. The crowd around him grows noisy. Startled, Uncle Lu puts down his chopsticks and looks toward the defensive line. He wonders if the ghost nest is attacking before nightfall, but he soon notices everyone is looking behind him instead. He turns to see a long, metallic dragon racing across the Guangdong Plains with incredible speed. The piercing sound of the train scatters the gray fog, cutting through the heavy, somber atmosphere of Line 7. It brings a sudden spark of life, a sight that hasn't been seen at this defensive line for many months. Whispers erupt around him. People ask what it is, wondering if reinforcements from the Evernight Palace have finally arrived. They hope this means they might actually survive the coming rainy season. Uncle Lu, however, remains silent. His eyes redden with emotion. Leaning on his crutches, he stands as straight as he can and smiles at the approaching train. With a trembling voice, he lets out a tearful laugh and curses that stinking brat under his breath. From the very first carriage, we see Xiaoqiu leaning out, grinning widely and waving his arms frantically while shouting for Uncle Lu. Xiaoqiu screams that he's finally back as the Fanyu high-speed train grinds to a halt about a kilometer from the line. This is the end of the tracks. As the members of Line 7 swarm the train, Uncle Lu waves his crutch in the air. He pushes to the front as fast as he can. Xiaoqiu leaps down from the train, his face beaming as he finds his old friend. "It's been a few days. Did you miss me?" Xiaoqiu asks, explaining that his master sent him with reinforcements after learning about Line 7. He gestures toward the high-speed train behind him, which is packed to the brim with soul sculptures. These sculptures can reduce turret ammunition consumption by 40%, and there are enough here to cover the entire defensive line. As the words sink in, the members of Line 7 freeze in place, their eyes wide with sheer disbelief. It takes a long moment for them to react, but soon they are excitedly clapping each other on the back, struggling to find words. They are speechless. A 40% reduction in ammo isn't just a delivery of ghost stones. It is something far more valuable. This gift is better than any stone, as it means they might actually survive the rainy season. Quickly, Uncle Lu cries, his lips pale. Trembling with excitement, he urgently gestures to those around him. "Go find Elder Qi. Hurry." He had intended to say more, but the sheer impact of the soul sculptures has pushed everything else aside. "No need to look for me." The crowd parts to reveal a white-haired old man followed by a small group of attendants. He arrives quickly on a skeletal horse, dismounting with surprising agility as he nears the gathered crowd. With eyes turning red with emotion, Elder Qi looks at Xiaoqiu and asks hoarsely if it's true about the 40% reduction. Xiaoqiu assures him there is no lie. There are 1,000 sculptures, enough to fortify the entire length of Line 7. The elder asks if they are reinforcements from the Evernight Palace, but Xiaoqiu shakes his head, explaining they were sent by his master. He adds that due to special circumstances, his master prefers to keep the name of his faction a secret. Furthermore, he asks Elder Qi to keep this assistance hidden from the Evernight Palace. Of course, the elder replies. The white-haired old man's lips tremble as tears begin to glisten in his eyes. He tells Xiaoqiu that it doesn't matter which faction he represents. Such a gift is beyond measure. He invites Xiaoqiu inside to prepare a feast, but Xiaoqiu politely declines, shaking his head. He points to the darkening sky, noting that night is falling and they should prioritize setting up the soul sculptures immediately. He explains that the sooner they are set up, the sooner they save resources, especially as the sky darkens and the eternal night approaches as scheduled. The nearby members of Line 7 quickly spring into action, and it isn't long before the work begins in earnest. Soon, a dreamlike darkness once again blankets the heavy mist, and Xiaoqiu follows Elder Qi with the members of the hidden pavilion. As they ascend the walls of Line 7, the moment the eternal night falls, the sea surface begins to churn as if it were boiling. Waves surge violently, and within a few breaths, a thick, nauseating stench begins to drift toward them from the water. An endless swarm of ghosts, stretching as far as the eye can see, rushes out of the sea, howling as they charge toward Line 7. At that same moment, the patterns on the surface of the sword feather turrets installed along the line begin to glow with a steady white light. Almost simultaneously, all the defensive turrets activate, launching palm-sized blades of cold white light into the air. These blades rain down in a massive barrage, covering the ghostly tide, while Elder Qi stands watch near one of the turrets. His eyes are fixed on the consumption of the ghost stones, and after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, his excitement peaks. It is true, the soul sculptures really do reduce the consumption by 40%, providing a massive boost to Line 7's defenses. Elder Qi takes a deep breath, his eyes moist with emotion as he looks at Xiaoqiu and offers his sincere thanks. He swears that as the only one in contact with the Evernight Palace, he will never leak the secret of who helped them. He insists he isn't a traitor despite what happened last time, but Xiaoqiu simply shakes his head, knowing the old man is innocent. If Elder Qi were a traitor, Line 7 would have fallen long ago. Xiaoqiu understands the weight of the tragedy the Elder is referring to. Last time, the Evernight Palace sent 7 heavenly master-level architects to assist, but they were all assassinated on their way back. They died at the hands of their own people, a fact that has left Elder Qi burdened with guilt and self-reproach ever since. Because of this, the Elder understands why this mysterious benefactor wants to remain hidden, but then he remembers something important. He mentions that when Line 7 was breached, the Evernight continent sent a night watchman with power nearing the 5 saints level. Normally, a night watchman cannot increase their cultivation, and he asks Xiaoqiu if he knows anything about this powerful figure. As for how he achieved it, the master hadn't actually asked him to look into it. It was simply his own curiosity. Elder Qi remained silent for a long time. Finally, he explains in a raspy voice that night watchmen possess a unique trait. Their very bodies function like a living formation. Their veins and meridians form patterns that can seal and compress immense energy, keeping that power tightly suppressed within them. Once activated, the formation ruptures, and the energy explodes. Though powerful, the night watchmen were once quite helpless against the ghost nests. Later, the Evernight Palace discovered a special circumstance. A night watchman's physical body actually has no upper limit for containment. They can seal and compress vast amounts of energy so that, once triggered, the resulting power is truly staggering. Imagine the process. Hundreds of ghost stones are liquefied into a milky white substance and then forced into the watchman's body. This energy from the stones is then sealed inside them, a process that is, as you might expect, far from pleasant. At first, the night watchman suffers through extreme agony, but slowly, very slowly, the body begins to adapt to the pain. As their limit for sealing energy increases, the watchman reaches the level of a second-tier practitioner. They can then unleash far greater power than ordinary watchmen, and by repeating this, they can become kings, emperors, or even 5 saints night watchmen. The pain only intensifies, but once they activate their power, the impact is earth-shattering. Xiaoqiu doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she follows Elder Qi's gaze toward the endless swarm of ghosts attacking Line 7. She remembers that Fan Yuzdiyu is also a night watchman, a role that seems to carry a heavy burden. It seems the life of a night watchman is destined to be a tragedy, and to be honest, it's a fate they don't even choose for themselves. It is decided the moment they are born. Elder Qi continues, looking somewhat dazed, explaining that all the palace's watchmen are volunteers. They willingly accept these injections because they want their final self-detonation to make a bigger impact. They want the world to remember they existed. While the ghosts rage, some people have secretly joined them, leaking vital secrets. Others sacrifice themselves in the rain. Yet many factions completely ignore Line 7's desperate pleas for help. And then, there is our group. The Elder admits he doesn't even know who they are, yet they sent aid without ever being asked, which, in this world, is a rare thing indeed. He muses that while this world is full of darkness, it is the few good things that make protecting this land feel worthwhile. It makes even death feel like a price worth paying. Xiaoqiu remains silent, offering no immediate reply to these heavy words. She simply stands there, gazing out beyond Line 7, where the overwhelming ghost nests spread like a relentless plague. They crash against the defenses while roars and explosions echo across the walls in a never-ending, violent symphony. The bursts of light and the blood blooming in the air below have become the main melody of this grim battlefield. Elder Qi seems unable to stop himself from talking today, rambling on regardless of whether Xiaoqiu is actually listening. Eventually, his voice fades into the background as Xiaoqiu's attention is fully captured by the ghost nests outside the line. We recall that when he and the other members of the hidden pavilion first arrived, they felt a profound sense of helplessness. In a massive conflict like this, their individual cultivation levels seem to have almost no impact on the overall tide of battle. But now, he has finally found his true purpose. His direction lies not on the front lines of Line 7, but in the rear. He decides that the hidden pavilion will be the ones to root out the traitors hiding within the Evernight continent. The moment Fan Yu officially enters the heart of the continent, every traitor will face the pavilion's judgment. It is what they do best. After a long night of combat, dawn finally breaks. The eternal night recedes as scheduled, and the people of Line 7 begin their daily chores. Xiaoqiu prepares to take his leave. He politely declines Elder Qi's offer of another banquet and heads to the canteen alone. There, he finds Uncle Lu, who has just woken up and is sitting at his usual table with 2 bowls of food already set out. He knows instinctively that one of those bowls is meant for him. Xiaoqiu walks over to the table without a word. He picks up the bowl of noodles and devours them hungrily, finally wiping the grease from his mouth with a look of pure satisfaction. He looks up at Uncle Lu and offers a small smile and a word of thanks. It has been like this for the past 6 months. While he guarded Line 7 by night, Uncle Lu worked through the day, meaning they rarely had much time to actually speak. They usually only saw each other during these brief meals, where Uncle Lu always used his seniority to secure their food first. Uncle Lu simply scoffs at the gratitude, having secured a hot meal for him so he wouldn't have to wait in line. He taps the stump of his remaining leg with his pipe, noting that on Line 7, the disabled get priority for food. He remarks that it would be a waste not to use such a privilege, before correctly guessing that Xiaoqiu is finally leaving. Uncle Lu waves his pipe impatiently, as if shooing away a fly, refusing to even look at Xiaoqiu as he says goodbye. Xiaoqiu stands up, hesitating for a brief moment before asking Uncle Lu if he would like to come away with him. He promises he can ensure the old man lives years longer elsewhere, but Uncle Lu coldly refuses, citing his father and son. Since they never left this post, he won't either. Besides, he asks with a dry wit, where could a legless man go anyway? Xiaoqiu pauses for a heartbeat, then walks away without looking back. Uncle Lu, for his part, remains just as still. Slowly, the old man leans on his crutch to stand, his movements heavy with the weight of years spent on this wall. He watches the high-speed train vanish into the distance, whispering Xiaoqiu's name softly to the empty air. It is said that the young do not feel the autumn wind, only realizing the cold once the years have passed. Xiaoqiu's presence had briefly made him feel young again, though he knows that youthful spirit is something that cannot be reborn. Long ago, he too had dreamed of seeing the whole Evernight continent or reaching the front lines, but those dreams are gone. Line 7 has become a sanctuary for the homeless and the broken, for men like him who have lost so much. To be honest, dying here is their only real destination. They aren't official night watchers, yet they live exactly like them. The sun rises on July 8th, year 380 of the Evernight calendar, deep within the nameless mountains. We find Chun Fan rising early as usual, heading out to continue his tireless work on the Jiangbei defense line. The project is nearing its official completion, and just like yesterday, he begins constructing the final series of buildings. As dusk falls after days of continuous labor, the Jiangbei defense line is finally and completely finished. Chun Fan stands atop the new city wall, looking out over the vast perimeter with a look of quiet, well-earned satisfaction. It has been nearly 2 years since he first arrived in this world, and in that time, much has changed. He has forged a defense line spanning 170 kilometers, featuring level 5 walls and advanced monitoring systems. It is a masterpiece of engineering, yet Chun Fan has no one to celebrate with. He stands there entirely alone. Leaning on his staff, he walks along the battlements, feeling the weight and texture of the fortress he built with his own hands. Eventually, he stops before a massive spirit cannon, looking out at the distant sea with a confident smile, ready for whatever comes. Time flows on, and we soon find ourselves at the end of October in the year 380 of the Evernight calendar. The rainy season is fast approaching, and over the last 6 months, the development of the city has progressed steadily. Mining operations on the new continent continue unabated, as does the exploration led by the reliable Wang Matzi. By now, they have explored nearly the entire continent, and after some careful calculations, they have reached a staggering conclusion. To fully cover the entire new continent with the protection of ghost fires would be a monumental undertaking. It would require exactly 169,361 max-level ghost fires, and the rains are coming. As the temperature begins to drop, we see Chun Fan wrapped in a thick blanket, sitting in his rocking chair atop the wall. He stares at the figures written on the parchment in his hand, remaining silent for a long time until Wang Kuei speaks up. The subordinate reports quietly that to achieve total ghost fire coverage across the new continent, the cost will be immense. They will need roughly 3.38 billion ghost stones, with a total installation time estimated at 1 full year. Chun Fan's brow furrows as he stares at that astronomical number, letting out a long, heavy sigh after a moment of disbelief. He leans back and waves a hand for Wang Kuei to leave. To be honest, even he is intimidated by such a figure. He wonders if this is truly a task meant for a human being, even one with his unique advantages. Without his heavenly blessings, even with enough stones, he would never find the rare materials needed to finish this. As October ends, the rains begin to fall, and only 2 years remain before the horrors of the undersea nest make landfall. As the sky begins to brighten with the first light of dawn, Chun Fan sets out with Lame Monkey, Xiao Qiu, and several members of the Fanyu secret cell. They board the high-speed train bound for the Guangdong Plains, and 3 hours later, the train carries them south toward the Jiangnan region. The train slows to a halt before defense line number 7. It is mid-afternoon, and a wave of commotion ripples through the personnel stationed there. A white-haired elder, accompanied by several subordinates, hurries from the crowd toward the train. It has been months since they last saw this vehicle. Inside, Chun Fan pulls a mask from his robes and holds it up for a moment, but after a brief thought, he tosses it aside. He realizes it is quite pointless. These people have never heard his name, and even seeing his face, they wouldn't know who he is. Once the train comes to a complete stop, he steps down onto the soil, which is heavy with the scent of death, just as Elder Qi rushes to greet them. Seeing Xiao Qiu following closely behind, the elder quickly realizes who this must be, and Chun Fan looks at him, calmly introducing himself as Nameless. Names are merely codes, he tells him, noting that only a few days remain before the crisis arrives, and that line 7, though a level 6 wall, lacks recovery methods. He explains that he is here to add restoration capabilities to the defense line, which will make the entire fortification significantly more durable. Elder Qi is momentarily stunned, his voice trembling with emotion as he prepares to have the entire garrison of Line 7 show their gratitude. Chun Fan speaks softly, telling him there is no need for pleasantries or speeches. He simply asks to be taken to the wall, as he is in quite a hurry. And so, we see Chun Fan mount the battlements of Line 7 for the first time, where he summons a skeletal horse to ride along the top of the wall. He gallops along the perimeter, stopping at regular intervals to set down altars and lay out a series of copper pipes. These pipes are embedded deep within the structure, connecting to the altars so that the energy can be used to repair any damaged sections of the wall. It seems like a modest addition, yet it will drastically increase the wall's recovery speed, an essential upgrade for the trials ahead. 3 days later, a visibly weary Chun Fan stands beside the Fanyu high-speed train, while Elder Qi gathers his people. The core members of Defense Line 7 have all come to see him off, grateful for the total transformation Chun Fan has achieved in just 3 days. With these modifications, if Line 7 were to face another ghost nest attack of the same scale as the last rainy season, things would be very different. It is now essentially impossible for the line to fall. He has, quite literally, solved the fundamental problem threatening their survival. Elder Qi looks on with reddened eyes, his voice trembling as he tells Chun Fan that he simply doesn't know how to express his gratitude. He makes it clear that Chun Fan has saved the lives of every single person on Defense Line 7, all 670,000 of them. In his eyes, Chun Fan has saved the surviving population of the Guangdong Plains. Meanwhile, our protagonist stands quietly upon the wasteland. He gazes back at Line 7, thinking of the last 3 days he spent racing across the fortifications with almost no rest, meeting so many people. As he prepares to depart, we see countless people gathered at the base of the Great Wall, watching him with a silent, heavy gaze. The area beneath the wall is packed with a dense crowd, and every face carries a certain kind of stoic indifference. It is the look of those who have grown numb to life and death, yet a flicker of hope, like a small spark, remains in their eyes. It's as if these people, once the walking dead, have suddenly come back to life. Chun Fan notes that the main turrets here are swordfeather models. He observes that ghosts killed by these turrets remain mostly intact, and he asks the elder how they usually handle the remains. Every day, Defense Line 7 produces a staggering number of ghost corpses that need to be skinned, deboned, and harvested for ghost stones. Elder Qi isn't entirely sure why this powerful man is asking such a thing, but he answers immediately and without hesitation. He explains that some skins and bones are kept as materials for alchemy or construction, though in the past, things were different. Usually, these remains were sold to various factions across the Guangdong Plains, who then distributed them further into the Guangxi region. Currently, they only keep the skins and bones, while the rest of the ghost carcasses are simply discarded as waste. Chun Fan nods slowly, informing the elder that in the coming days, high-speed trains will run constantly between Guangdong and his own territory. Their new task will be simple: load all those ghost skins, bones, and even the discarded corpses onto the arriving trains. In exchange, he will pay them in ghost stones. He promises that someone will arrive soon to negotiate a fair, if modest, price. He admits that his own faction is short on stones, but he won't let the people of Line 7 suffer a loss. Elder Qi, however, won't hear of it. The elder waves his hands dismissively, insisting that the 1,000 soul-eating sculptures Chun Fan already provided are more than enough. Those sculptures have already saved the line, and the fact that a powerful leader came in person to help is a debt they can never truly repay. Elder Qi insists that Chun Fan should simply take the ghost corpses for free, but our protagonist just smiles without saying much more. Instead, he turns toward the high-speed train, simply stating that the matter is settled and the elder should just arrange the logistics. He promises ghost stones will be provided, though perhaps not in massive quantities, before finally taking his leave. To be honest, he has a plan. Over the last 3 days, he has worked to expand the rail lines across the Guangdong Plains, adding branches to reach every sector of the defense line. This expansion allows for the most efficient collection of ghost remains, which was, after all, the true purpose behind building the Fanyu high-speed rail. His primary goal is to provide offerings for the sacrificial tower, where trading corpses can yield rare materials, treasures, and even architectural blueprints. The supply of remains in Fanyu itself is actually quite low, mainly because his powerful cannons tend to vaporize enemies into useless dust. Elder Qi takes a deep breath, looking back at his people with a dazed expression as he realizes the magnitude of this new partnership. He instructs his team to ensure the ghost corpses remain as intact as possible during the harvesting process, treating them with newfound care. He warns them not to mess this up, as it is a rare chance for them to actually contribute something of value to their savior. Looking at the core members of Defense Line 7, we see their eyes filled with hope, finally sweeping away the gloom of the past. It is now October 31st of the year 380 in the Eternal Night calendar, and the train is making its return journey across the Jiangbei wasteland. The locomotive speeds toward Mount Wuming while outside, a thin, persistent rain begins to drum rhythmically against the metal carriages. A slight chill seeps into the cabin, signaling that the rainy season has arrived once again. A perfectly ordinary change of weather, one might say. As the train finally pulls into the station at Mount Wuming, the eternal night descends on schedule, bringing with it a thick, suffocating darkness. The shadows quickly swallow the Jiangbei wasteland, and the silence is broken by the deafening roar of thunder echoing across the plains. Chen Fan steps off the train and looks toward the harbor, knowing the massive energy collectors stationed there have already begun to recharge. Upon returning to his wooden house, he heads straight for his bed. The exhaustion of the last few days has finally caught up with him. The other members of Fanyu seem unbothered by the rain, continuing their daily chores with a calm that borders on indifference. On the first morning of the rainy season, Chen Fan wakes up early with a single goal in mind: to begin constructing the ghost fire towers. After that, the materials are transported via high-speed rail to the new continent, following the specific coordinates marked by the logistics pavilion. One by one, the ghost fire towers are placed at their corresponding points. This is the beginning of his massive project, costing 3.39 billion ghost stones. He calls it the New Continent Prairie Fire Project, an ambitious undertaking that won't show even the faintest results for at least a full year. As time slips away day by day, we see that Fanyu remains largely unaffected by the usual chaos of the rainy season. The season slowly draws to a close, and over on the new continent, the Prairie Fire Project has finally achieved some initial progress. The sky begins to darken, and if all goes as expected, tonight should be the very last night of the rainy season. On the Guangdong Plains, Elder Qi stands before the core members of Defense Line 7, his expression steady and focused. He tells them that even if the rain doesn't stop tonight, there are only 2 or 3 nights left at most before the end. He urges everyone to stay alert tonight, for once this season passes, they can finally enjoy another year of much-needed rest. The core members respond in unison before dispersing to their posts. After finishing his duties, the elder pauses for a moment. Just then, a sudden heat radiates from his chest. Elder Qi's expression shifts as he pulls out a small stone riddled with tiny holes. He wraps his palm completely around the stone, and immediately, a voice begins to resonate inside his mind. It is a message only he can hear. A raspy, masculine voice asks if Defense Line 7 held firm and if any emergencies occurred. The voice is cold and incredibly direct. Elder Qi hesitates slightly, his gaze drifting toward the devouring sculpture at the foot of the wall. This message is from the Eternal Night Temple. To be honest, he knows exactly why they are asking such questions now. The temple had been spread too thin. Before the rainy season began, they were already unable to provide any support to Defense Line 7. Though it was never said out loud, they had essentially abandoned the defense line. Yet here they are, having survived against all odds. Since they endured the season, the temple will naturally conclude that something unexpected happened. He needs a plausible explanation. He decides to tell them that just before the rains came, they luckily discovered several productive ghost mines nearby, allowing them to survive. His lips move slightly without making a sound, sending his words through the mother-child stone held tightly in his hand. His words travel thousands of miles to the Eternal Night Temple, reaching the specific member responsible for contacting him. The voice returns to his mind, cold and devoid of emotion, asking about the ghost mine's output and if it can fund a new project. They want to build a massive 170-kilometer defense line in Jiangbei, promising to send architects if the funds are sufficient. Elder Qi shakes his head without a moment's hesitation, wondering just how massive a mine would have to be to fund such a feat. It is simply impossible. The voice on the other end remains utterly flat, showing no reaction to the news that Defense Line 7 survived. Even the discovery of a ghost mine doesn't move them. They merely note that the lingering presence in Jiangbei will fade in 2 years. The temple is no longer able to support Jiangbei, and so they issue a direct order to Elder Qi as the person in charge. He is to take all core members and as many ghost stones and treasures as possible once the rainy season ends and head east. Their destination is the Yellow Spring Mouth Canyon at the edge of the Eternal Night Continent. They are to abandon Defense Line 7. Elder Qi's face turns pale instantly. He knows that region well. It sits right on the border of the Guanxi Plains. Because of its unique geography, that canyon effectively acts as a gateway between the Eternal Night Continent and the Guanxi area. He asks what will happen to the people living west of that canyon, including those in Jiangbei and Guanxi. The answer is simple. They wait for death. The voice remains disturbingly calm, lacking even a hint of malice. It sounds more like a clerk reading a grocery list. They are merely describing a routine matter, explaining that frontlines 3 and 4 were lost during the rainy season. The casualties were staggering. To compensate, the Eternal Night Temple is doing whatever it takes to stabilize the situation behind the lost lines. They are rushing to build 2 new lines of defense, but their resources have been severely depleted by the recent chaos. Now, they can only afford to build a single line at the entrance of the Yellow Spring Mouth Canyon, where the rift nodes are smaller. A shorter line is easier to defend than 2 long ones, after all. But Elder Qi isn't thinking about logistics. He flatly refuses to obey. He lets out a low, angry growl, asking how they can simply abandon so many regions and the countless lives within them. At the very least, he argues, they must warn the people so that everyone has a chance to evacuate together. Even as Elder Qi's angry shouts echo, the voice on the other end offers no reaction, continuing its flat, detached narration. The voice tells him that if he truly has enough skeleton horses and logistics to manage an evacuation, he is welcome to try. Elder Qi asks if the Eternal Night Temple is so depleted that they lack even the ghost stones to build the Jiangbei defense line. Hearing that simple, cold confirmation, his intense agitation suddenly drains away, leaving him in a long, heavy silence. With bloodshot eyes, he finally rasps out that he understands, but he will not leave. Not a single person will retreat from Defense Line 7. He declares they will defend it to the death. This time, the voice doesn't answer immediately, pausing for a brief, telling moment. A rare trace of emotion finally enters that voice as it recites the creed. The eternal night clock faces the dawn of eternity. The voice bids Elder Qi a solemn farewell to his death, promising victory as the communication stone in his palm grows cold. Elder Qi stands alone atop the city wall, his eyes filled with despair as he gazes down at the rows of tents below. The rain drenching him fails to extinguish the fire of frustration in his heart. Instead, it only makes him feel more restless. We see him reach his breaking point after an unknown amount of time, finally letting out a roar of pure, suppressed agony. He kicks the stone wall in a frenzy, shouting that they had already survived this rainy season, that they had already won. Things were supposed to be getting better, barring any accidents. The next few rainy seasons shouldn't have been a problem at all. But the temple's inability to fund the defense line has shattered his illusions, leaving this entire region to be abandoned. Suddenly, he remembers the mysterious gentleman. Like a drowning man reaching for a straw, a flicker of hope returns to his eyes. He begins fumbling through his robes for a communication talisman, but just as quickly, he freezes in place, paralyzed by reality. That gentleman never left him a way to make contact. And besides, even if he could reach him, what would it change? Even if that man represents a power passed down from ancient times, he is still just one person, or perhaps one faction. How could a single entity possibly fund an entire line of defense? Elder Qi stands there, his eyes bloodshot, staring at the camp. And it is at this very moment that a member of Defense Line 7 approaches him, unaware of the heavy news. As the man passes by, he can't contain his excitement, whispering Elder Qi in a low voice while trying his best to stay composed. We hear him murmur that they held the line, his voice barely audible, yet the sheer joy in his tone is practically overflowing. Elder Qi pauses for a moment before forcing a strained, somewhat painful smile, agreeing that yes, they did indeed hold their ground. A heavy, ink-like darkness begins to surge from the horizon as the eternal night descends, marking the final night of the rainy season. Every member of Defense Line 7 is buzzing with energy, swarming the city walls to defend through this final, critical stretch. They tell themselves there is no room for slack, roaring at the countless ghosts rushing from the sea, as if the monsters were taunting them. The ghosts seem to be celebrating, creating a scene of chaotic energy that this deathly quiet defense line had never witnessed before. Every face we see is filled with an unprecedented sense of hope and excitement. However, the reality of the situation is far bleaker. Only Elder Qi remains standing perfectly still, gazing up at the infinite, oppressive darkness stretching out above his head. As the torrential rain pours down, he feels a suffocating wave of despair begin to completely submerge his spirit. It becomes difficult for him to even breathe, and a moment later, his vision goes dark as he collapses unconscious onto the ground. The next day, the sky clears and the rain stops instantly. After 30 days of downpour, the sun finally breaks through at dawn. We see Chun Fan walk onto the wall of Cave 1, looking out at the world as he takes a long, lazy stretch. With a smile, he turns to Xiao Qiu and asks the young man to accompany him on a trip to Defense Line 7. The rainy season has ended, and as he glances at the calendar on the wall, he notes it is now the beginning of the year 381. It is a new year, and with only 2 years left until the undersea ghost tide lands, he decides it is time to move. Chun Fan boards the Fanyu high-speed rail, traveling south toward Jiangnan as he makes his way to the 7th defense line. He gazes out the window at the passing scenery, humming a nameless little tune. To be honest, his mood is quite good. The Prairie Fire plan over on the new continent is proceeding steadily, exactly as he had envisioned it. With a large batch of ghost stones waiting at the defense line and Fanyu growing rapidly, it seems everything is finally getting better. And so, the high-speed rail arrives at Defense Line 7, where Chun Fan steps off and gazes at the bustling activity before him. After observing the scene for a moment, he begins to smile. Despite the noise, every face is brimming with excitement. It is clear that Defense Line 7 didn't just hold its ground. The casualties must have been remarkably low as well. He notes the mountain of ghost corpses piled nearby. They are all his, and soon, they will be traded for treasures in the sacrifice tower. Elder Chi emerges from the noisy crowd with a few subordinates, making his way over to stand before Chun Fan. We see that Elder Chi's face is covered in bloodshot veins, and his condition looks terrible. He is, after all, a man in his 80s. His current state is enough to make anyone worry he might simply drop dead at any moment, prompting Chun Fan to ask what happened. Chun Fan's brow furrows. The elder looks so ill from the rainy season that he resembles a tailman, the kind of person heavily scrutinized back in Fanching. Elder Chi takes a deep breath and gestures for his companions to disperse, wanting to speak with Chun Fan in private. Standing alone before Chun Fan, his voice trembles with a mixture of despair and unwilling resignation as he addresses him. He explains that while the entire team is grateful for the support, the Eternal Night Palace has officially abandoned Defense Line 7. The palace has established a new line at Huangquanca Canyon, as countless ghost nests will land from the Jiangbei seabed in 2 years. It seems the palace lacks the strength to build a new defense in Jiangbei. The canyon is located at the easternmost edge of the Guanxi Plain. That area is the true coastline of the Eternal Night Continent, while our 4 Jiangbei regions and 2 Guangdong regions are merely a large, protruding island. He urges Chun Fan to leave as soon as possible, though he himself refuses to go, unable to simply watch so many people perish. After speaking these words, Elder Chi's condition suddenly seems to improve, a flash of grim determination appearing in his eyes. He repeats his gratitude for the support, while Chun Fan's brow furrows as he begins to process the full weight of the situation. He realizes the Eternal Night Palace has no intention of defending Jiangbei. They don't even have the ghost stones left to build a fortification there. The situation at the front lines has become that critical. They have already lost 2 defense lines and suffered heavy casualties. Chun Fan pulls the ghost skin map from his robe to check, finding a continuous mountain range at the easternmost edge of the Guanxi Plain. Within that mountain range lies a massive gap, known as the Huangquanca Canyon, the very place the palace intends to retreat to. Having grasped the gravity of the situation, Chun Fan looks at Elder Chi with a calm smile and tells him not to panic, for Jiangbei already has a defense line. He explains that a defense line stretching 170 kilometers is already firmly established, ensuring that Defense Line 7 will not fall. He assures the old man that they will all survive, leaving Elder Chi frozen in place with a look of utter confusion in his eyes. The elder wonders how such a thing is possible. Jiangbei previously relied solely on a lingering aura to deter the sea creatures, so where could a wall have come from? The Eternal Night Palace wouldn't lie about such a thing, especially since they've already lost 2 lines and lack the resources to build a new. It seemed impossible to build a new defense, yet in that moment, a sudden realization strikes Elder Chi like a bolt of lightning. His lips begin to tremble as a wild thought takes hold, and he looks at the man before him in complete disbelief, wondering if it could truly be him. Chun Fan simply laughs. After knowing each other for so long, he realizes he has completely forgotten to properly introduce himself. He introduces himself as Chun Fan from Fanyu, the man who has been personally guarding the Jiangbei region for several years now. If the Eternal Night Palace lacks the strength to protect Jiangbei, then he and his people from Fanyu will stand as the shield instead.